Aaron woke up, lying face down in dry grass. Above him hung a foreign sky with two pale moons. A steady, monotone voice echoed in his head. The voice announced that the transfer was complete. The voice announced that each participant had been assigned a personal body of water and the surrounding territory. The voice announced that a participant's survival was directly linked to the condition of their water. Aaron stood up and looked around. His plot was a hill of reddish rock and tough grass. In the middle of the hill, moisture seeped from a crack in the rock. Aaron stepped closer. A single drop rolled out of the crack. It fell into a palm-sized depression. Aaron waited. The next drop appeared a minute later. A translucent panel unfolded before his eyes. The panel displayed a name, Drying Spring. The panel displayed the flow rate, 1 drop per minute. The panel displayed the water source's rank, the lowest possible. Aaron stared at the puddle at the bottom of the depression and said nothing. Then he heard laughter. The laughter came from below, from the foot of the hill. That was where foreign territory began, stretching toward the horizon as a solid blue expanse. It was a lake several kilometers wide. A tall man with a shaved head was walking along the lake's shore, examining Arena's hill. The man shouted that he'd ended up with a funny neighbor. The man shouted that his lake was called the Deep Bowl, and that the panel had given him a rank of 4 out of 5. The man shouted that he wouldn't last even a week without Arena's pond, because here there was water, food, protection, and currency. Then he introduced himself. His name was Gorton. Gorton advised Arena to dig his own grave in advance while he still had the strength, and walked away along his own shore. Arena didn't reply. He sat down by the crevice and began to think. The panel hung before his eyes, and he scrolled through its sections. The territory section showed the boundaries of his hill. The threats section indicated that the first wave of wild creatures would begin in 7 days, and that the creatures would attack the weakest bodies of water first. The body of water properties section was obscured by a gray veil, with a note stating that the properties would be revealed upon first contact. Aaron leaned toward the depression. A midge was floating in a puddle at the bottom. It had fallen into the water and was flapping its wings. Aaron instinctively reached out to pull it out. He always pulled creatures out of the water. An old habit from another life, where he used to stand for hours over glass tanks. The thought flashed through his mind and vanished. Aaron's finger had been scratched by a stone when he woke up. The scratch touched the water before the midge did. A drop of blood dissolved into the puddle. The water flared with a dim green light. The midge stopped struggling. Its body dissolved into the glow and reassembled. An insect twice as large as before rose from the puddle. Its wings shimmered with a metallic sheen. The panel came to life. The property of the body of water had been revealed. Life-giving water. Water that comes into contact with the blood of a living creature creates an enhanced copy of it. The copy is bound to the owner of the body of water. The amount of water consumed for creation depends on the creature's size and complexity. Aaron reread the lines 3 times. Then he looked at the midge. The midge landed on his wrist and folded its wings. The panel displayed its specifications. Steel wing midge. Durability 4 times that of its original form. Speed twice as fast. Aaron exhaled slowly. The others had gained volume. He had gained a mechanism. The volume was running out. The mechanism was working. He stood up and surveyed the hill with new eyes. He needed blood. Any blood from any creature. The more forms he passed through the water, the more tools he would receive. In another life, he knew one rule better than any other. The stability of a system depends not on size, but on diversity. He didn't yet know how this rule was connected to the spring. He just sensed that there was a connection. Before sunset, Aaron scoured his hill. He found a nest of sand crickets under a flat rock. He found the burrow of a small lizard. He found a spider with a yellow cross on its back in a crevice. Catching them with his bare hands was torture. The cricket only gave in on the 5th try. Aaron pinned it down with a blade of grass and slit it open with a sharp chip of rock. A single drop of blood fell into the recess. The water flared up again. The meter read 3 drops. 3 minutes of the spring's operation for a single cricket. A finger-sized cricket with copper-colored chitin emerged from the water. The panel identified it as a copper cricket and noted its reinforced hind legs. A wren ordered it to jump. The cricket leaped 10 meters and returned in a straight line. The creatures obeyed mental commands. That changed everything. By nightfall, a wren had 4 forms to his credit. A steel-winged midge, a copper cricket, a lizard with compacted scales that the panel named Rockback, a spider whose web had become 6 times stronger. The panel opened a new section, Diversity Index, 4 species. Beneath the index appeared a line that a wren had been waiting for, not daring to hope. The spring's replenishment rate increases with the diversity index. Current growth, 4%. Aren stared at the number and felt a sense of calm and clarity wash over him. The spring was not a death sentence. The spring was a seed. Water creates life. Life expands water. Expanded water creates more life. A closed loop of growth. Gorton, with his lake, had no need for such a loop and was therefore not given one. The weakest body of water was granted the strongest law. That night, Aren didn't sleep. He sat by the crack and counted. 1 drop per minute is 1,440 drops per day. Creating a cricket costs 3 drops. Creating a lizard cost 11. Larger forms would cost hundreds and thousands. That meant the order of operations was strict. First, the small things for the sake of the index. The index for the sake of consumption. Consumption for the sake of larger forms. No spending on beauty. No spending on revenge. Down by the lake, bonfires were burning. Gorton was celebrating with some people, and snippets of songs drifted up to the hill. Aren listened and wrote down a list of targets with charcoal on a flat stone. In the morning, he went down to the border between the territories. Along the border ran a strip of no man's land with bushes and teeming with life. Aren set snares made of spider silk. The silk could even hold a bird. By noon, he had obtained the blood of a vole, a bronze beetle, and a small gray bird. The index had risen to 7. The spring's growth rate reached 7%. At the last snare, Gorton met him. Gorton stood on his side of the border, chewing on a stalk. He asked why Aren was bothering with insects when one was supposed to die with dignity. Aren replied that he was preparing for the wave. Gorton laughed and said that the wave would sweep away the puddle along with its owner. Then he went to go swim in his lake. Aren watched him go without any ill will. Skeptics were even useful to him. As long as people think you're dead, they don't consider you a target. On the 4th day, something happened that Aren would remember for a long time. He tried to draw blood from a marsh leech he'd caught in a no-man's ditch. The leech had latched onto his arm first. He had to rip it off along with the blood. Enraged, Aren threw it into a hollow hole, along with his blood still clinging to its sucker. The water glowed brighter than usual. The meter read 20 drops. A leech the length of a palm, with a smooth black body, crawled out of the water. The panel displayed a description that made Aren freeze. Healing leech. Its saliva accelerates wound healing 8-fold. It draws out toxins. Aren stared at the line about toxins and recalled how, in his past life, he'd explained to visitors that a leech wasn't a creature of abomination, but an ancient healer. Back then, people listened to him out of politeness. Now that knowledge was worth a life. He held the leech up to the scratches on his arms. An hour later, there was no trace of the scratches left. Aren sat down by the spring and looked out over his tiny kingdom. A midge hovered in the air like a sentry. Crickets sat in a chain along the border. A rock lizard basked on a stone. A spider spun a thread between the bushes. A leech slept in a damp hollow. 7 species, 7%. The drop was falling just a little faster now. Somewhere below, the vast Lake Gortana glistened. Aren smiled for the first time in days. Let them look down on his puddle from above. In 7 days, a wave would come and test not the volume of the water, but its composition. Meanwhile, the panel flashed a new message. 3 days remained until the first wave. The wave strength forecast had been updated. Reason for the update? Anomalous activity at the territorial border. Aren reread the last line and slowly stood up. The anomalous activity wasn't coming from him. The activity marker was glowing at the border with Lake Gortana. Something large was heading toward the water, and it wasn't coming for Aren. Aren didn't go to check the marker right away. He first took stock of his resources. 1,540 drops in reserve in the hollow he'd expanded with a chip of rock to the size of a basin. 7 types of creatures, not a single fighter larger than a lizard. If the anomaly decided to climb the hill, he'd have nothing with which to meet it. So he needed to know the enemy before the enemy knew him. Aren sent out the steel-winged midge. The midge flew toward the border, and Aren closed his eyes. His connection with the creatures conveyed sensations rather than images. He felt the cold of foreign water. He smelled the silt. Then he felt pressure, a heavy, slow pressure, like that of a boulder creeping forward. An armored beast the size of a wagon was moving along the no man's land toward Lake Gortana. 6 legs, a bony dome on its back. Tentacles hung down from beneath the dome, which the beast used to feel its way along the ground. The panel transmitted a fragment of data through the headset. A wild species, the mudbreaker. It ravages coastal structures. It drinks from bodies of water. Aaron reread the last two words twice through the comm. It drinks from bodies of water. Such a creature had been created by this world as a tax on water. Aaron withdrew the comm and fell into thought. The Illidrob was heading toward the Great Water because the Great Water smells stronger. Aaron wasn't interested in a puddle. He could have sat quietly and watched his neighbor solve the problem. But Aaron saw it differently. Down below, a walking blood bank of a rare species was making its way toward the shore. To let such blood slip away would be a waste. The only question was how to extract blood from a creature that weighed as much as 10 Aarons. He knew the answer from his past life. You don't defeat a large beast with another large beast. You defeat a large beast with the environment. In the reservoirs of his former world, the most terrifying death for the bottom-dwelling giants wasn't a predatory fish, but a tiny parasite in their gills. Aaron opened the control panel and began preparing the environment. Over the remaining day, he did 3 things. He created 4 more healing leeches by altering their programming. A leech's saliva healed wounds because it thinned the blood and numbed the bite. That meant the same properties could be used as a weapon. An imperceptible bite, blood that wouldn't clot, and a weakening beast. He created a second spider and ordered the spiders to weave a narrow passage with their threads between the boulders right at the border. The passage led to the only spot where the slope allowed a heavy carcass to be carried up from the no man's land to the waters of Gorton. And he spent 120 drops on a copy of the gray bird. The improved bird was given claws capable of holding a leech aloft, an aerial delivery of a healer to a patient. In the morning, the mudbird flew out to the lake. Aaron watched from the hill. Below, Gorton was already standing with 2 spears and 3 of the men who had sung by his campfires. They were laughing. Then, the mudbird drank the first drip of water from the shore, and the laughter stopped. The water sank into the beast as if into a pit. The spears bounced off its dome. One of Gorton's men lunged from the side, and a paw flung him onto the rocks. Gorton bellowed orders. His lake was of the 4th rank, but he hadn't created a single creature in all these days because his water knew how to do only one thing: to be big. Aaron sent a bird. The bird flew over the dome and dropped leeches into the soft folds at the beast's neck. No one below noticed this. The people only saw that an hour later, the Illidrob began to stagger. Thin streams of blood flowed from beneath the dome and did not stop. The beast turned away from the water. A wounded animal always flees from danger towards silence, and the quietest path was the passage between the boulders. The Illidrob squeezed into the passage, and the threads entangled its paws. The strength of the improved spider's threads held the bird in place. 40 threads on each paw held the beast as well. The beast roared and grew weaker. Aaron descended to the passageway with a stone scraper and an empty desert nutshell serving as a vessel. He collected as much blood as he could carry. He did not kill the Illidrob. There was no need to kill it, nor did he have the strength. He removed the leeches and cut some of the threads. The blood-drained beast crawled out onto the no man's land and dragged itself away into the wasteland. Aaron climbed up to the spring and poured the blood into the water. The meter read 900 drops, almost his entire supply. The water glowed green for a long time. Then a dome began to rise from the stone basin. Aaron's Illidrob was smaller than a wild one, about the size of a large dog, but the panel showed the dome's strength to be 3 times greater than its initial value and added a line that made Aaron whistle. Reverse current. The creature is capable not only of drinking water, but also of returning what it has drunk to its owner's water source. A living cistern, a walking water importer. The diversity index rose to 9. The spring's growth rate reached 9%, and then Gorton came up from below. He climbed the hill uninvited, and stopped when he saw the little mud dweller by the basin. Gorton was silent for a long time. Then he asked what it was. Aaron replied that it was his puddle that had grown teeth. Gorton looked at the leeches, the spiderwebs, and the bird with claws, and his expression changed slowly, like ice cracking. He saw a beast that spears could not pierce. He understood who had brought down this beast. He had come to laugh, but instead stood there, taking in with his eyes the stranger's trifles, which turned out to be an army. As he left, he said only one thing. He said he was taking back his words about the grave. Aaron didn't have time to savor the moment. The panel flashed red. 1 day until the wave. And the second line, attention. Your incident with a wild creature has been recorded in the regional registry. The territory has been elevated on the watch list. Aaron reread it and realized that the victory had cost him his invisibility. The registry meant that somewhere there were those who kept lists, and the lists were kept by those who have the power to make demands. That night, a small illodrop went down to the no man's ditch and brought back 1,500 drops of murky water. The spring accepted the water and purified it. The depression had to be widened again. Aaron worked on chipping away at the stone and mapped out a defense plan in his head. The wave would target the weakest. His body of water was still classified as the lowest rank. That meant they would come for it first. He had his forces in position by dawn. Crickets served as scouts along the perimeter. Spiders formed thread-like minefields on 2 of the 3 trails. He left the third path clear on purpose. The enemy always chooses the easy path. The easy path led to a stone-filled hollow beneath the cliff, where the stoneback and the mudbreaker lay in wait. A bird carrying leeches kept watch in the air. The wave came at noon. Sand jackals emerged from the wasteland and headed up the hill. The panel counted 11. The gaunt creatures with pus-colored eyes were drawn by the scent of water. Everything happened just as Aaron had calculated, and not quite. 8 jackals strayed onto the clear path and were crushed in the stone pocket by the blows of the dome and the rocks that Aaron was hurling down from above. 2 became entangled in the threads, but the last jackal was larger than the others and smarter than the rest. It didn't take any of the paths. It scrambled up the sheer side of the hill straight toward the spring. Aaron spotted it when the creature was just 10 steps from the water. Only Aaron himself stood between the jackal and the spring, a splinter of stone in his hand. The jackal leaped. Aaron had just enough time to think that the stone fragment was too short, and then steel wings closed in between him and the beast. The midge struck the jackal in the eye at full speed. The tiny creature died instantly, but the beast was blinded in one eye and missed its target. That was enough. The bird shed its leeches. Illodrop managed to rise and intercept the jackal with its dome. Aaron struck with the shard exactly where anatomy itself had taught him to strike. When it was all over, he sat by the spring, holding the broken steel wings in his palm. The panel offered to create a new midge for 3 drops. 3 drops. The price of the life of the one who had shielded him with his own body. Aaron created a new drone and 10 more just like it, the first platoon of his future aerial swarm. The index had risen. The jackal's blood had yielded a new species with a heightened sense of smell. 11 species, an 11% increase. A drop now fell every 53 seconds, and the depression had turned into a basin 2 steps wide. And at sunset, a man in a gray cloak with a registry badge on his chest climbed a man in a gray cloak with a registry badge on his chest. He introduced himself as a registrar named Ocean. He surveyed the basin of creatures and fortifications and jotted something down on a bone tablet. Then he spoke words that sent a chill down the back of Arena's neck. He said that in 10 days, Arena's territory would be subject to an assessment, and that the assessment would be conducted personally by the lord of these lands, the man to whom the sea belongs. 10 days is 240 hours. Aaron broke them down into 3 tasks: water, species, information. The water issue was handled by the silt catcher, who now made 2 trips to the ditch each night. The species issue was addressed through hunting and bartering, and information about the owner of the sea had to be obtained from people. People gathered in one place. On the 7th day of every 10-day period, a trading circle opened on no man's land near the old rock, between the territories. Gorton told Aaron about this. He now went up the hill on his own and brought news as payment for the right to observe the creatures. Gorton didn't admit that he was afraid of the evaluation, but he asked if he could buy a leech from Aaron. His man was still lying there with a shattered chest from the illodrop. Aaron gave him the leech for free and told him to return it after treatment. 2 days later, Gorton's man was back on his feet. And so Aaron acquired something he hadn't planned on, a reputation. He went to the trading circle no longer as the master of the pond, but as that very healer from the hill. The market turned out to be a bustling ring of tents and campfires. Here, fish were traded for salt and weapons for cloth. Aaron walked through the rows, listening more than he spoke. By noon, he knew the most important thing. The ruler's name was Draven. His sea lies 2 days' journey to the east, and there is no first rank, because the panel had assigned the sea a 0 rank, off the scale. A ranking is a tax. Draven annexes weak territories and turns their owners into laborers. He imposes a tribute of water on the strong. No one dares to argue with him, because creatures emerge from Draven's sea in numbers sufficient to settle any dispute. Aaron listened, and a cold rage built up inside him. He hadn't raised the bowl from a single drop just to hand it over to some foreign registry. But 10 days isn't enough time to wage war against the sea. That means he needs another approach. To demonstrate not strength, but usefulness. Those who are useful aren't devoured. Those who are useful are protected. In the clearing, Aron set up his tent, or rather, a piece of cloth stretched between two spears, with a single leech on a clay dish. He healed. He charged a fee in the blood of rare creatures, a single drop from each patient, and at first, the merchants tapped their fingers against their temples in disbelief. The first to sit down was an old man with a festering wound on his leg that the local herbs hadn't been able to cure. The leech drew out the pus and poison within an hour. The old man wept and offered a knife as payment. Instead of the knife, Aron took a drop of blood from his pack lizard. By evening, there was a line outside the tent. Blood flowed into his vials, made from eggshells, in a thin stream of different species. An armored toad from the salt marshes, a spiny eel, a shaggy heron from the south, a diving rat. Each vial is a future creature. Each patient is a voice that will tell of the healer from the hill beyond. With the last patient, Aron saw for the first time a gray glove with a bone token. It was a second circle accountant named Vec. She wasn't sick. She sat down in the patient's chair and said she'd been watching him since noon. She said she'd seen many masters of the great waters, but not a single one who'd squeezed so much from a spring. Then she explained why she'd come. Draven's assessment isn't a conversation, it's a demonstration. The master surveys the territory and decides whether to consume it or tax it. He always consumes the small waters. Vec couldn't recall any exceptions in her 3 years of service. She spoke with the precision of someone who warns not out of kindness but out of accuracy. Aron asked what the ruler valued besides size. Vec thought for a moment and replied that Draven was a collector. He brought rare species from all lands to his sea. For a true rarity, he had even paid with freedom. Aron returned to the hill after dark and sat down by the pool. The pool had already become a small pond, 3 steps wide. 21 species lived on the hill. The growth rate was 21%. A drop fell every 40 seconds, but the real inflow came from 2 elodrobas and a rain vein that Aron had laid out of flat stones, collecting dew from the entire slope. He looked at the pond and pieced together a plan based on Vec's words. You must not show food to a collector. You must show a collector an exhibit that is not in his collection, a species unique in the world. Aron could have only one such species, one that doesn't exist in nature. For the next 4 days, Aron worked feverishly. He did things he'd never tried before. He mixed the blood of an armored toad and the blood of a healing leech into a single drop of water. The first attempt cost 200 drops and resulted in a lifeless lump. The second produced a toad with a useless second pair of eyes. Aron adjusted the proportions just as he had once adjusted the composition of the water in the reservoirs by tenths. On the 5th attempt, the pond flashed white instead of green, and a creature emerged from the water that even the mud breather recoiled from. A toad the size of a ram, clad in bony armor with ridges. Transparent slime oozed from glands on its back. The panel thought for a long time. Then it displayed a line that Aron would never forget. Unique species. Armored healer. The slime heals allies' wounds. The armor withstands spear thrusts. Classification not found in the World Registry. Not found in the World Registry. Aron said this aloud and laughed for the first time since the transfer. He named the toad Gruda. Gruda ate enough for 3 and followed Aron around like a mountain on legs. The index jumped 3 points because a unique species counted as 5 ordinary ones. The pond expanded to 7 paces wide and waist deep. On the 9th day, trouble came from a direction Aron hadn't expected. At night, the crickets sounded the alarm on the southern trail. Aron went out and saw torches. 8 men in leather armor were climbing the hill silently and skillfully, divided into 2 groups. These were not savages from the wasteland. They had ropes, hooks, and cages. The cages told Aron everything. Someone from the trading circle had told others about the healer, and not just the neighbors. Someone had decided it was easier to steal the miracle beast than to pay for treatment. People turned out to be worse than jackals. They cut the ropes with knives. They circled the stone sack, guided by the stories they'd heard from others. 2 of them caught the stone-backed creature in their net, and Aron felt her terror through their bond as if it were his own. And then he let go of Gruda's leash. The armored healer spun around on the trail and plowed through the crowd like a plow through dry earth. Spears shattered against her armor. Hooks slid off. Gruda didn't kill. Aron had forbidden it. She broke and threw them aside. A swarm of 11 steel-winged gnats stung their eyes. Leeches fell from the bird onto those who were still standing. An hour later, 8 people bound with spider silk lay on the trail, and Aron sat across from their leader, silent. The leader spat out blood and said that Aron was a dead man. He said they were the people of Harlan, the owner of the Long Lake from the north, and that Harlan does not forgive. Aron replied that he would deliver their answer to Harlan along with them. In the morning, he released all 8 of them, unarmed and without their cages. Into each empty cage, he placed an ordinary cricket from the hill. Let Harlan look at the spoils for which he lost 8 fighters and his weapons. Humiliation lasts longer than fear. Gorton, upon learning of the night's battle, arrived furious and said that Aron was a fool for letting them go. Aron replied that the Lord of the Sea would arrive here in a day, and that a mountain of corpses on the trail was a poor sight for the evaluation. But inside, he harbored a different thought. After the battle, the panel flashed the message he'd been dreading, yet not surprised by. Incident logged. Assessment priority elevated. The ruler will arrive at dawn, a day ahead of schedule. Aron stood by his pond in the darkness. 24 species. A unique cluster. A swarm. Cisterns. A pond waist-deep where, a month ago, there had been a single drop per minute. It might be enough. It might not be enough. To the east, over the wasteland, the glow of foreign fires was rising. The Lord of the Sea was not coming alone. Draven climbed the hill just as the sun broke the horizon. Aron was waiting for him by the pond, standing rather than sitting. A seated host looks like a supplicant. The Lord of the Sea turned out to be an elderly man with hair bleached white by salt and eyes the color of shallow water. 6 men followed him. 5 of them carried weapons. The 6th was Ossian, holding a tablet. And behind the men, down the slope, flowed whatever had caused Aron's crickets to fall silent all at once. A creature resembling a long wave with fins followed the Lord of the Sea across dry land as if it were water. The panel refused to display its specifications and showed only its rank. Marine. Draven stopped by the pond and stared silently for a long time. He looked at the water, which, according to all the lists, was supposed to be a puddle. He looked at the swarm in the air, at the silt dwellers by the shore, at the spider-like threads between the rocks. Then he said that the registry had deceived him for the first time in 3 years. The registry had promised him a spring. Ossian began his assessment. He measured the depth with a pole, recorded the species, and with each name, his eyebrows rose higher. On the 24th species, he lost his place and started over. Draven walked along the shore and asked questions. The questions were as precise as blows. Where did the water come from? Aron pointed out the silt dwellers and the stone vein for dew. Why were the creatures larger than their original forms? Aron explained the properties of blood and water without specifying proportions or limits. The truth, but not the whole truth. Draven nodded. Then he saw Gruta. The Lord of the Sea froze. He circled the armored healer 3 times. He ordered Ossian to find the species in the registry, and Ossian spread his hands. No such species existed on any list in the world. And then Draven turned to Aron with the look of a man who had found a pearl in the mud and was considering whether to buy the shell or simply take it. He offered a price right away. Gruta would be absorbed into his sea. In exchange, Aron would receive vassal status instead of being consumed, along with the ruler's protection from any neighbors. Ossian, standing behind him, signaled to Aron with a single glance that this was an unprecedentedly generous offer. Aron looked at Gruta. Gruta looked at him, and the slime on her shell glistened in the morning sun. Through their bond, he sensed her steady, warm trust. And he said no. It grew very quiet. The 5 armed men shifted. A wave behind them lifted their fins. Aron spoke quickly, because the silence would have killed him. He said that a dead specimen is just one exhibit, but a living master is a source of exhibits. He said that Gruta was not his last creation, but his first. He proposed something else. Once every decade, he creates a new species for the Sea Lord, one not found in the registry, a unique one, at Draven's own request. And the hill remains free territory, without tribute and without absorption. The workshop does not pay taxes in clay. The workshop pays in artifacts. Draven was silent for a long time. Then he asked what Aron needed to work. Aron answered honestly. Blood. Rare species from the sea and distant lands, a single drop from each. The Lord of the Sea laughed. His laughter was both terrifying and infectious. He said it was the first time he'd seen a vassal who'd bargained for supplies instead of tribute. He agreed. Ossian recorded the contract on a bone tablet in 2 copies. Draven named his first order right away. His sea was plagued by deep sea worms that were gnawing at the seabed. He needed a species capable of clearing the seabed and sensing the worms in the silt. The deadline was 10 days. The ruler left, taking a promise with him instead of a toad. Gorton, who had been watching everything from his border, climbed a hill and said that Aron was either a genius or a dead man on borrowed time. Aron replied that in this world, they were one and the same. And then the price for victory began. Word of the free hill that paid no tribute spread across the lands faster than the wind. 3 days later, the first settlers arrived at the border, a family with 2 children and a dried-up wineskin. Their land had been swallowed up by Harlan's long lake, and they had nowhere else to go. 2 more followed them, then 5. People sat on the no man's land at the foot of the hill and looked up at the water. Aaron faced a choice he hadn't asked for. To drive them away would mean showing everyone that the hill was just another predator. To accept them meant to feed, water, and protect them. His pond had grown deeper, but it wasn't bottomless. He accepted them, but he accepted them according to the rules of his system. Every adult gave the hill a task, digging channels for dew veins, weaving baskets, carrying clay. Every child caught insects for the index. Down at the foot of the hill, a village of huts began to grow, and for the first time, Aaron felt a weight heavier than any beast, the weight of strangers' lives on his water. Work on the order was going poorly. The bottom cleaner demanded a mixture of a diving rat and a spiny eel with something that could sense through the silt. The sense belonged to a jackal-like creature, a triple mixture. Aaron spent 400 drops on 6 failed attempts. The panel displayed unviable, and the water spat out dead clumps. On the 7th try, he remembered an old rule from his past life. When a mixture doesn't work, change the order, not the ingredients. He injected the blood not all at once, but in 3 bursts, one after another, with a 1-minute interval between each. The pond flashed white. A beast emerged from the water, resembling a long otter with a spiked crest and blind eyes. The panel identified the species as a needle diver and confirmed its uniqueness. The needle diver could sense movement in the ground 30 paces away. There were 2 days left until the order was due when Harlan struck back. He didn't send people, he sent water. That night, the needle diver frantically darted near the shore, and Aaron was awakened by its distress. A dark streak was moving along the stream that flowed down from the hill toward the village. Someone further up the no man's land had poured poison into the dew-laden stream, a filthy concoction made from rotten marsh roots that turned the water deadly. The streak had already passed the upper rocks and was heading toward the pond. And downstream from the pond, the settlers were drinking from the stream. Aaron threw all his strength into the effort at once. The sludge eaters stood in the stream and began to drink the poison, absorbing the toxin into their own bodies. The leeches leaped in after them, drawing the filth out of the water. Aaron himself, along with the people, dug out the stream bed, diverting the remainder of the streak into a dry ravine. By dawn, the pond was saved. But both mud-eaters lay on the bank, breathing shallowly. Their bodies had saved the water and absorbed the poison themselves. In the village, 3 children who had managed to drink some of the water the previous evening had fallen ill. Aaron brought Gruda to the huts. The slime of the armored healer drew the poison from the children within a day. The Ilodrobes were treated with leeches and by Gruda for another 3 days. Everyone survived. Not a single species was lost. But Aaron hadn't slept for 3 days, and on the 3rd night, sitting by the pond, he caught himself noticing that his hands were shaking. He had defeated the beast of men and the poison, and the world responded each time with a higher stake. The panel flashed. Index, 31 species. Growth, 38%, including 2 unique ones. The pond reached 20 paces, and the panel changed its class. Small lake. Aaron looked at the word lake and felt no joy. He felt a gun sight on his back. On the day the order was to be delivered, Ossian arrived with security and accepted the needle diver. The accountant stared for a long time at the blind beast, which unerringly found the stones buried in the sand. Then he spoke quietly, not for the record. He said that Harlan had filed a complaint with the landowner. Harlan claimed that Aaron was poaching his people and poisoning his waters. The lie was turned inside out like a glove, and Draven scheduled a trial. According to the laws of the lands, a dispute between 2 water owners is settled at the border of their territories by a trial of the beasts, to the death. In 5 days, the needle diver would set out into Draven's Sea, and in 6, Aaron would have to field a fighter against Long Lake's finest beast. As he left, Ossian added one last thing. He'd seen Harlan's beast during the last assessment. It was a water serpent 8 men long, and no one had ever stood a chance against it. 6 days to prepare for a fight against an 8-meter-long snake. Aaron began by forbidding himself to panic and breaking the task down into parts, just as he had once analyzed the causes of a dead tank's failure. What did he know about the snake? 8 men in length. Water is its natural habitat. That means Harlan will demand the fight take place in water, because the law allows the winner of the draw to choose the battlefield, and Harlan will rig the draw. What can a snake of that size do? Squeeze with its coils, swallow whole, strike with its tail. What can't it do? Aaron wrote 3 words in charcoal. Breathe under the silt. See through the murk. Stop. The last word was the most important. A body 8 men long is enormous. An enormous body cannot stop instantly. Inertia is a weapon that is always with the beast and always against the beast if the battlefield is set up correctly. Aaron went to Gorton. It was the first time he'd asked his neighbor for help, and his neighbor listened in silence. Aaron wasn't asking for a fighter. He was asking for a spot. The narrow bay of the deep bowl adjoined the border of the long lake, and, by law, was suitable as a battlefield. The bay was shallow, with a single deep channel running down the middle. Gorton asked what he would get in return. Aaron replied that he would get Aaron as a neighbor instead of Harlan for the coming years. Gorton thought for a moment and said that wasn't enough. Then Aaron added a drinking post on its shore and free medical care for his men. Gorton agreed and added something of his own accord that Aaron hadn't asked for. He said that his people remembered who had knocked down the Elodrob and who had helped their comrade back on his feet. If Harlan brought dishonest seconds, Gorton's men would take their places at the arena. For the remaining days, Aaron trained his fighter and prepared the arena. The arena was easier to set up. At night, the villagers went underwater, drove stakes into the seabed, and stretched nets made of spider silk, not for combat, but as guides. The net won't stop the snake. The net would imperceptibly narrow its acceleration corridors. The needle diver, who had gone out to sea only a day earlier as agreed, managed to dig 3 transverse ridges into the bottom of the trench. The snake would have to pass over them at full speed, and the depth above the ridges reached the snake's crest. The fighter was a tougher challenge. Aaron had no creature in the same weight class as the snake, and there wouldn't be enough water to raise one in 5 days. The small lake now yielded 6 drops per minute, taking into account all the veins and cisterns, but a large body required tens of thousands of drops, so mass would not be used against mass. Aaron laid out all the vials of blood in front of him. Armored toad, eel, rat, heron, jackal, mudskipper. Blood from small sea creatures from Draven's first shipment, among which was a vial labeled Electric Ray. Aaron held that vial for a long time. In a past life, he had seen how a small stingray in a communal tank could, with a single electric discharge, paralyze a fish twice its size. An electric discharge in water means a halt, and bringing an 8-meter-long body to a stop at high speed over a rocky ridge means a fracture. The plan came together in his mind with a click. He wouldn't build a snake killer. He would build something that would force the snake to kill itself against its own mass. For 3 nights, Aaron mixed the ingredients. The blood of the stingray and the eel produced a flexible body capable of holding its own electric charge. The blood of the mudskipper added bony plates to its back. The blood of the jackal gave it a sense of the water's movement. 4 infusions, one after another at intervals. The first 2 attempts died in the water, and each cost 800 drops. On the 3rd attempt, the small lake flared white so brightly that the light could be seen from the village. A beast emerged from the water, 1.5 men long, resembling a flat eel encircled by bone rings with 2 whiskers by its mouth. The panel identified it as a thunder miner and confirmed its uniqueness. The miner's discharge struck 5 paces into the water, and each strike required a day to charge. 1 shot. There would be no second in battle. On the day of the debriefing, everyone gathered on the shore of the bay. Draven sat on a rock as if on a throne, with a wave lapping at his feet. Ossian and Vec held up signs. Harlan turned out to be a dry man with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He looked at the menorah and smiled even wider. Then, Longlake released the serpent. The water in the bay swelled and surged forward. The serpent was not 8 men long. It was 10. Harlan had been raising it all these days, just as Aaron had been raising the menorah. A groan rippled through the crowd. Gorton, standing next to Aaron, muttered through clenched teeth that this wasn't a trial, but an execution. As expected, Harlan won the draw and chose water. Everything was going according to someone else's plan, except for one thing. The water was the very same one. As a signal to begin, Ossian struck a bone plate. The serpent struck immediately and moved with grace. It accelerated in a straight line, its jaws opening as wide as a barrel. Miner darted away, and the serpent set off in pursuit. Aaron guided his beast through the bond, standing knee-deep in the water near the shore. He steered it not away from the serpent, but along the corridor. The nets directed the chase toward where the ridges lay in wait. The snake cleared the first ridge, scraping its belly but not even noticing. Speed was its god. The miner leaped over the second ridge through the shallows, while the snake, at full speed, slammed the crest of its back into the rock. A crunch was heard on the shore. The snake roared and slowed down, but kept moving. 10 men's lengths long, and all that length brimming with rage. At the third ridge, the miner stopped. He stood above the rocks in the shallow water and waited. Live bait. The final point in the corridor. The snake spotted its frozen prey and threw its entire body into the lunge. And when its head hung over the ridge, the miner fired a single, point-blank shot. The 10-meter-long body convulsed at full speed. The guided ram turned into a flying carcass. The snake slammed its neck into the rocky ridge. The sound was like a tree falling. The spine behind its head snapped against the rock under the weight of its own rings, which continued flying forward by inertia. The water boiled and then settled. It all took less time than it would take to count to 100. Miner surfaced by the ridge, alive and unharmed. The shore was silent. Then the shore screamed. Gortan's people and the villagers shouted so loudly that birds rose from the distant hills. Harlan stood there, pale as a sheet. He watched as the fruit of his 10 years of labor lay at the bottom of a foreign bay, and his face aged before his very eyes. Draven rose from the rock, walked to the water's edge, and gazed for a long time at the miner, the shoal, and the nets. The Lord of the Sea saw what the crowd did not. The crowd saw the wonder of the beast. Draven saw the field. He turned to Aaron and declared before everyone that the inquiry was over and the truth had been established. Harlan's complaint was found to be false. According to the law of the lands, a liar must pay a fine to the victim. Draven set the fine himself. 1/3 of the territory of Long Lake was to be ceded to Arena Hill, along with the shoreline and everyone living on it. Harlan opened his mouth and closed it again. No one dared to argue with the Lord of the Sea. That evening, bonfires blazed on the hill. The village celebrated. Gortan sat by the small lake arena, drinking herbal tea and saying that he was now afraid to be friends with Arena because each of his victories brought greater trouble. Arena remained silent and stared at the water. His neighbor was right and had no idea just how right he was. The panel flashed updates all evening. Territory annexed, 70 new residents, species index, 34, 3 unique species, growth, 47%, water body class confirmed, small lake on the verge of medium. And then a message arrived that Aaron reread 3 times, after which he quietly set his cup aside. Attention, owner. A request for data on your territory from an external registry has been detected. Request level, Maritime Circle. Aaron asked Vec, who was still at the celebration, what the Maritime Circle was. The accountant stopped smiling. She said that Draven wasn't the only ruler of the sea. There are 9 seas in this world, and once a year, the 9 rulers gather on the open water to compare their collections and divide the lands. The rumor about the source that creates non-existent beasts has already spread beyond the wasteland. Vec said that now the hill is known to people for whom Draven, with all his sea, is simply one of 9 chairs at the table. Aaron stood at the edge of his lake, which had grown from a single drop per minute. A miner slept at his feet. In the depths, the eyes of the needle divers from the second brood glowed. Somewhere at the bottom of Gortana Bay lay a serpent whose blood Aaron had already drained into vials. He thought about how, somewhere beyond the wasteland, the 9 seas had already spoken his name, and about how he had in reserve something that none of the 5. Water that cannot be measured by depth. Water that has the power to create. 1/3 of the Long Lake turned out not to be a gift, but a wound that would have to be stitched up. Aaron arrived at the new land the day after the settlement and saw what he had expected. 70 people stood along the shore and looked at him as if he were an invader. These people had lived under Harlan's rule for years. Harlan was cruel, but straightforward. The new master was a monster of legend who snapped 10-meter-long snakes in 2. The elder of the coastal strip, a burly fisherman named Tolm, stepped forward. Tolm said that his people would work because they had nowhere else to go. But he said they'd seen many masters, and all masters were the same as long as some had water and others had thirst. Aaron didn't waste words arguing. Words here were worth less than silt. He asked Tolm what ailed the riverbank most of all. Tolm gave a crooked smile and replied that everything ached. The nets were empty because Harlan had fished them clean for Feed the Snake. The children cough from the rotten, stagnant water in the Oxbow lakes. And at night, sand jackals come from the wasteland because Harlan had taken the guards north. Aaron nodded and left without promising anything. Promises would only have reinforced the elders' distrust. Instead of promises, a day later, Gruda arrived at the shoreline with 2 leeches, and a leech station was set up right by the huts. The coughing children were given water from a small lake, which the silt crushers had brought in wineskins. Another day later, Aaron brought the second brood of needle divers to the Oxbow Lakes. and overnight the blind creatures cleared the channels clogged with silt. The stagnant water began to flow and grew clearer. And on the fourth night, when the jackals crept toward the huts again, they were met by a swarm of steel-winged midges and copper crickets that raised such a racket that the shore awoke. The people rushed out with torches and saw the jackals running away. Tolm stood among his people and watched a midge that had landed on his oar. In the morning, he climbed the hill alone. He was silent for a long time, and then he said he had been wrong. He said he had seen the masters who take. This was the first time he'd seen a master who gave first. Tolm offered something Aaron hadn't asked for. The fisherman knew Long Lake down to the last pool, and knew where Harlan hid his traps filled with rare fish, which he kept off Draven's records. By the law of the whirlpools, a third of the lake went to Aaron, along with everything in it. The blood of rare fish was lawful spoils. Over the course of a decade, the index grew by 6 species, 40 species. The growth exceeded 50%, and the small lake arena sighed and expanded its shores by another 10 paces. The panel changed its classification, medium-sized lake. But the wider the water became, the longer the list of concerns grew. Now Arena owned 2 bodies of water a day's journey apart, and he physically could not be in 2 places at once. The system itself suggested a solution. After the territory was annexed, the panel opened a new section, Overseers. The owner could assign a creature to a body of water and grant it the authority to make simple decisions. Aaron assigned Gruda to the shoreline. The armored healer became the governor, and the people of the shore quickly got used to turning to the ram-sized toad as their administrator. Gruda healed and settled fights simply by sitting between the quarrelers, and in the evenings, she lay by the water like a mountain of calm. Tolm said it was the first time he'd seen a leader who didn't steal. Amid these concerns, the deadline for Draven's second order arrived. The Lord of the Sea requested a beast for deep-sea reconnaissance. His collectible species were perishing at great depths due to the pressure, and he wanted eyes that could see the seabed. Aaron received 3 vials of sea blood via courier, a deep-sea blind crab, a glowing jellyfish, and a dropfish with a soft body that the pressure does not crush but embraces. The work took 5 nights. Aaron had already grasped the art of blending, the softness of the teardrop fish as the base, the jellyfish's light as a lantern, the crab's shell to protect vulnerable spots. 4 infusions, 2 failures, each costing 1,000 drops. The medium-sized body of water allowed for such expenses, and it was a new sensation. He no longer counted each drop, he counted in thousands. On the 3rd attempt, a creature emerged from the water that terrified the village children to the point of hiccups. A translucent beast with a soft body glowing blue from within, with 3 eyes on stalks and armored plates on its crown. The panel named it the Bottomless One and confirmed its uniqueness, the 4th non-existent species. During a test dive, the Bottomless One settled on the bottom of the deepest pit in Long Lake and transmitted such a crisp image to Arena via the link that he whistled in amazement. Ossian accepted the order, and, for the first time since they'd met, allowed himself to do something other than take notes. He said that a separate entry had appeared in the registry titled Arena Hill, and that, to the best of his memory, no such entries had ever been created for anyone else. And that same evening, a new man arrived at the village at the foot of the hill. A tall traveler in a faded blue cloak, carrying a staff of white coral, introduced himself as a wandering expert on waters named Merrick. He said he was coming from the eastern lands, had heard of the healer from the hill, and was asking for lodging in exchange for news. He had plenty of news to share. By the campfire, he spoke of the eastern seas, of the war between 2 rulers in the south, and of the price of salt. The people listened with their mouths agape. Aaron listened too, but he wasn't looking at the man's mouth, he was looking at his hands. Merrick's hands were not those of a traveler. There were no calluses from a staff, nor cracks from the wind, and the coral on his staff was deep-sea white coral, which does not grow closer than 3 seas from here. Aaron said nothing. He gave the guest lodging, food, and a place by the fire, and at night he ordered 2 gnats to hover over the guest's shelter, and 1 cricket to listen by the wall. Merrick lived in the village for 3 days and was beyond reproach. He helped carry clay, told the children stories, and marveled at everything around him, exactly as much as a polite stranger would. On the 4th night, he left the hut with an empty water skin and headed not toward the stream to drink, but up the slope toward the middle lake. The midges led him. At the water's edge, Merrick looked around, took out his wineskin and a glass, and drew water from Lake Arena. Then he took out a knife, pricked his finger, and let a drop of blood fall into the glass. The water in the glass did not flare up. It remained dead water. Merrick tried twice more with different water and different cuts. Nothing. Arena, watching through the connection from the darkness, felt a cold satisfaction. He had long suspected it and now knew for certain. The property did not reside in the water. The property resided in the connection between the water and its owner. It could not be stolen, neither with a wineskin nor a barrel. Merrick stood over the lifeless glass, poured it out, and his face, bathed in moonlight, grew businesslike and empty. He returned to the hut, gathered his things, and left the village before dawn without saying goodbye. Aaron did not stop him. A captured spy is a scandal. A spy who leaves empty-handed is a report that devalues the very purpose of the theft. Let whoever sent Merrick read that the hill's water is useless without the hill's owner. Aaron wanted them to read that, because from it followed a conclusion that protected him better than any beast. A dead Aaron is a dead source. A living Aaron is a source of non-existent species. It's in everyone's interest to protect him, even his enemies. But there was another side to that same coin, and it was a nagging one. If you can't steal the water, then you can steal the owner. In the morning, Aaron told Vec everything. She now visited the hill more often than her duties required. The accountant listened, and her expression darkened. She said that white coral is worn on the staffs of the servants of the house of Iris, the ruler of the Eastern Sea. Of the 9 rulers of the maritime realm, Iris was considered the most patient and the most dangerous. She never struck first. She found out everything first. Vec said that a visit from an expert in D meant only one thing. The Eastern Sea had finished gathering information. Aaron stood by the water and watched as the bottomless abyss glowed in the depths, as a miner slept in a pit, and as a swarm traced circles above the shore. 41 species, 4 unique ones. The middle lake where the droplet had been. He was building his power faster than anyone else in these lands. But letters between the seas flew faster than the water rose. In the evening, the panel flashed a line that silenced everyone around the campfires to whom Aaron had read it. Registry notification. In 30 days, the annual Maritime Circle will take place on the Great Water. The agenda has been updated. As the 9th item, the Assembly will consider the status of an unaccounted-for source of generative waters. The owner's presence is mandatory. Aaron decided to turn the 30 days leading up to the circle into 30 days of preparing the fortress. He gathered his peculiar war council by the lake, Gortan from the neighbors, Tolm from the shore, and Vec from the registry, unofficially, and Gruda, who offered no advice but whose mere presence calmed the conversation. Aaron laid out a map of his lands, drawn in charcoal on a stone, and named 3 weaknesses. First, the water is rising faster than the defenses. 40 creatures could no longer cover the perimeter of the middle lake and the shoreline. Second, all their eggs were in one basket. If anything happened to the main lake, the hill would die. Third, he himself. The system's sole irreplaceable component walked on 2 legs and slept at night. The council argued until dark. Gortan demanded they raise battle giants. Tolm asked for boats and ships. Vec said that neither giants nor boats would help against the sea houses and that they needed to think about alliances. Aaron listened to everyone and made his own decision. He declared a decade of great multiplication. He drew the principle from a past life, where he had once saved a dying reservoir, not with medicine, but by distributing its inhabitants among 10 small containers. Stability is not a wall. Stability is a multitude of centers. The following days merged into a continuous effort from dawn until dark. People from the shore and the village dug a chain of small ponds along the riverbed, from the hill to Long Lake. The 6 sludge crushers hauled water, filling each basin. Aaron assigned a guardian from among the creatures to each pond and populated them with the bred species. A leech pond, cricket meadows, spider terraces where threads were harvested like crops and woven into nets, ropes, and light armor that no knife could cut. By the middle of the decade, the chain of 9 ponds had connected the 2 lakes into a single system, and the panel issued an update that Aaron hadn't expected. A connected network of water bodies belonging to a single owner has been detected. The network coefficient has been applied. Growth has increased. The water level in the main lake rose so high that it flooded the old shoreline mark by an elbow's length. Tolm, who had been walking along the chain of ponds to check on things, returned and said that more had been accomplished in a decade than Harlan had done in years. And on the 11th day, the wasteland reminded him that the world doesn't wait while you're building. The cricket outposts on the far perimeter fell silent one by one before noon. Communication was cut off not by an alarm, but simply by silence, and that silence was worse than a scream. Aaron raised a swarm. The gnats flew over the ridge of hills and showed him what made him slowly sit down on a rock. A wave was moving across the wasteland toward his lands. Not 11 jackals, as in the early days. The display panel counted and faltered. More than 300 creatures were advancing in a broad crescent. Jackals, armored monitor lizards, a flock of scavenger birds above them. And at the center of the crescent came the thing that was driving them all. A beast as tall as 2 human figures, resembling a bull molded from clay, with 6 legs and a maw stretching across its chest. The panel barely managed to pick it up and displayed the result. The Wasteland Herder. Threat level, equivalent to a minor sea creature. Creatures of this rank had never set foot in these lands before. Upon seeing the image through the records, Vec said one word: driven out. Someone in the east had begun a great hunt and driven the wasteland westward. Aaron didn't waste time wondering who. The answer was obvious, and it could wait. He had half a day and the system he'd been building for a decade. He didn't concentrate all his forces into a single fist at the main lake. He did the opposite. He opened his palm. The chain of pawns became a chain of traps. Each pawn was assigned a garrison and a task, not to kill, but to bite off a piece. A wave of wild creatures isn't an army, it's hunger on the move. Hunger cannot maintain formation if food lies at the edges. The crescent-shaped horde reached the first pawns by sunset and began to fall apart. Jackals lunged at the grasshopper meadows and got bogged down in the cobweb-like terraces. Monitor lizards crawled toward the water of the small ponds and were zapped by the second minor spell that Aaron had managed to conjure from the blood of the first. The birds were met by a swarm that, over the course of a month, had grown into a cloud of 40 midges. Aaron stood on the hill and directed operations via the link, just as he had once tuned 10 reservoirs at once. He felt each pond as clearly as a finger on his hand. By midnight, a third of the crescent moon remained, and that third gathered around the herder, who walked on without being distracted by the pawns. It wasn't food that drove him, it was the mission, and Aaron could see that clearly now. A white coral ring glistened on the clay bull's neck in the moonlight. The herder emerged at the main lake, exactly where Aaron had planned to meet him. By the old stone pit, which, over the course of a month, had become a deep quarry filled with water. Against the rank of a minor sea creature, Aaron deployed everything he had. Minor the First struck with a discharge from the water and brought the herder's front legs to a halt. The heap absorbed the blow from the jaws against its shell and held firm, though it was thrown back 10 paces. The needle divers severed the tendons of the hind legs from beneath the silt, and then Aaron did what he had always forbidden himself to do. He entered the quarry himself, chest deep in water, to shorten the connection to its limit and merge all the creatures into a single rhythm. The world, through the connection of 40 creatures at once, nearly tore his head apart. But for a moment, he ceased to be the master and became the water itself. Water with 40 stings and a single mind. The herder died before dawn. He drowned in the quarry under the weight of his own clay, when his severed legs could no longer hold him, and the swarm drank his eyes. The silence after the battle rang. Aaron climbed out of the water and was thrown off balance by the connection's rebound. Blood was running from his nose. Vec held him by the shoulders and said that this wasn't right, that a connection of such magnitude consumed its hosts. Aaron wiped the blood away and replied that he knew. He now knew his limit, and that knowledge had cost him blood. They counted the losses in the morning. 9 midges, 4 crickets, 1 needle diver from the second brood, crushed by monitor lizards. None of the humans had died, and Aaron considered that the most important statistic of the night. The driver's blood was drained into vials before the carcass finally sank to the bottom of the quarry. Overnight, the panel had delivered what it had never delivered before. Species Index, 49. 5 were unique because the monitor lizard's carapace, mixed with rat blood, had produced a new species right in the heat of battle. The water body class was updated. Large lake. Growth, 68%. But it wasn't the numbers that occupied Arena's mind as he sat over the ring of white coral taken from the dead driver's neck. Iris didn't attack. The attack could have been attributed to the circle. Iris had staged a test disguised as a natural phenomenon. She observed how and with what he defended himself. She sized him up. And everything he had revealed that night, including his own entry into the water, now lay in someone's report bound for the east. That evening, a messenger from Draven rode up to the hill. The Lord was summoning Aaron to the sea, not with an order, but for a conversation before the circle. The messenger added on his own that the Lord was in a bad mood, because the night wave had been seen not only here. The wasteland had swept through the lands of 3 lords, and all 3 had suffered losses. Someone powerful was moving the pieces on the board without asking for the board's permission. Aaron got ready in an hour. He left the hill to Gruta, the chain of ponds to Tolma, and checked his connections with key beings 3 times, just as one checks the locks when leaving home for a long time. At the border, Gorton caught up with him, shoved a bundle of dried meat into his hands, and said gruffly that if Aron didn't return, he would personally come to the sea with a spear. Aron set off eastward, and with every step, the lake behind him tugged at his connection like a thin, warm thread. After 2 days of travel, he saw the Sea of Draven for the first time. Water stretching to the horizon. Water like the sky laid upon the earth. Aron stood on a coastal cliff, and inside him there was not awe, but a calm, hungry calculation. The panel seemed to hear him. It opened the long, silent forecast section before him, and displayed a line that made his throat go dry. If the current growth dynamics continue, the estimated limit of the owner's body of water? C class. Time to reach this limit is undetermined. Obstacle identified. Territorial volume exhausted. There isn't enough land for a C-class body of water. Aron reread it and understood. His water would run up against his borders. To grow any further, he would one day need something that wouldn't be given willingly, someone else's space. And all 9 owners would realize this the very second they saw his map. Draven received Aron neither in a tent nor in a hall. The ruler was waiting for him on a flat rock jutting out over the sea, where the wind tore apart words and eavesdropping was impossible. Below, beneath the rock, shadows the size of houses moved about. A collection amassed over 9 years lived in those waters. Draven began without preamble. He said that the situation facing the circle was dire. Of the 9 rulers, 3 had already made inquiries about Aron. Iris from the east, who measures everything. Cassid from the south, warlike and greedy for weapons. And Morvain from the north, about whom Draven had just said that no one bargains with him because he doesn't buy, he takes. Draven spoke plainly. The question of the source will be raised at the council. There will be many ways of phrasing it, but the essence is the same. Whose side are you on? A free source of non-existent species is a violation of the balance that the 9 chairs will not tolerate. They will offer Arena their patronage. Rejecting all offers at once means war with everyone at once. Agreeing to one means war between the rest and that one. Aron asked what Draven himself wanted. The Lord of the Sea paused and answered more honestly than Aron had expected. He wants the source to be under his control because that will double his influence at the table. But he had seen the quarry and read Ossian's reports, and he understood that you couldn't put a chain around Aron's neck. Aron would snap the chain, and it would be lucky if it were only the chain. That's why Draven proposed a different arrangement. Not vassalage, but an alliance. Formally established before the Circle and certified by the registry. Military, commercial, and maritime. Aron looked out at the sea and weighed his options. An alliance with Draven would cover his back, but also make him a target. He asked for a day to think it over, and was granted it. But by morning, his deliberations had ended of their own accord, because a white ship with a mother-of-pearl sail approached Draven's shore from the east. Iris didn't wait for the council. The mistress of the eastern sea stepped onto the foreign shore with 2 attendants and asked Draven, as the lord of the land, for permission to speak with the guest. According to protocol, he could not refuse. So Aron saw for the first time the woman who had been sizing him up all month. Iris turned out to be an elderly woman, with white hair held back by a coral hairpin, and eyes so calm that any noise in their presence seemed foolish. She spoke to Aron in Draven's presence, without lowering her voice. She had nothing to hide, because the strength of her position lay precisely in her openness. She said she knew about Merrick's vial, and made no apologies. Knowledge is worth more than propriety. She said she'd seen the report on the driver's night, and that she wasn't the one who'd sent the driver west. She'd merely placed a ring on the beast that someone else was driving, just to see who they'd suspect. Aron listened and realized that every word she spoke could be the truth, a lie, or a door, and that it was impossible to tell one from the other. Then Iris made a proposal. She wasn't offering a blood pact, she was offering knowledge. For 300 years, her house had been gathering information about the creative waters. Aron wasn't the first. The panel that had fallen silent came to life in his mind on its own, and highlighted a long gray section labeled History of the Property, Access Denied. Iris, looking him in the eyes, said that before him, there had been 4 owners of the creative springs in the world. All 4 are dead, and not a single one died at the hands of enemies. She offered her house's archives in exchange for one thing. Once a year, Aron would create a vision at her request, just as he did for Draven, an equal contract between the 2 houses. Draven stood as dark as a cloud, but remained silent because the offer was impeccably polite. Aron asked what had caused the 4 to die. Iris smiled for the first time during the conversation and replied that the answer lay in the archive. The first page is a gift. She placed a bone plaque on the stone and walked toward the ship. 3 lines were burned into the plaque. Creative water grows as long as diversity grows. Diversity grows as long as the owner's connection grows. The bond grows until it surpasses the owner. Aaron read it 3 times and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. He remembered the quarry, the blood from his nose, the moment when he was water with 40 stingers. The 4 before him had not been killed. The 4 had burned from within in their own web. That evening, he gave Draven his answer, an alliance, but with one condition, which Aaron added as he looked at Iris's plate. A clause was inserted into the contract stating that neither party had the right to demand work from the source beyond what was agreed upon. 1 visit per decade for Draven, 1 visit per year for Iris, provided she verifies the archives. The rest of the time, his connection belongs solely to his water. Draven didn't understand the purpose of that clause, but signed anyway. Ocean assured him. For the first time since the transfer, Aaron had something that was more valuable than water in this world. A piece of paper that the powerful found it profitable to honor. Aaron walked home a changed man. Iris's disc weighed on his bag more heavily than the contract brought him joy. The limit wasn't in the ground as the panel had stated. The limit lay within himself, and that meant his entire strategy of establishing multiple outposts led not only to stability, it led to the day when there would be more outposts than he could keep track of. A solution was needed, and he began to search for it as he always had, within the system itself. On the hill, he was greeted as if he had returned from war. He listened to the reports, issued orders, and at night sat by the large lake and opened the section on overseers, which he had until then used blindly. He read the descriptions until dawn and found it, the highest level, highest tier. A being with sufficient mental complexity capable of taking over a portion of the network's connections, becoming a node. Requirements: a unique species, mental capacity no less than that of a human, creation cost undetermined. Here it was, the answer the 4 dead owners had sought but never found. Don't let a single head control the entire network. Grow second heads. For 3 days, Aaron prepared the most expensive concoction of his life. As a base, he used the blood of Harlan's water serpent, drained after dissection, a long, powerful body that lives in water. To it, he added the blood of the wasteland driver for volume and power, the blood of the bottomless one for depth, and the blood of Gruta for healing slime and a calm temperament. And for the final drop, he added his own, because the network node needed compatibility with its owner. The panel warned twice that such a mixture had no precedent. The consumption figure was so high that a large lake would have had to shrink by 1/3. Aaron looked at the number and confirmed it. The water burned white all night. The light was visible from the deep bowl, and Gorton rushed over by morning with a spear, deciding that the hill was Mediga. By dawn, a creature emerged from the lake, which had shrunk by 1/3 onto the shore. At the sight of it, Gorton sank to the ground right where he stood. A long body covered in pearlescent scales, supported by 4 clawed paws, a neck like a snake's, a head with whiskers like a catfish's, and antlers like a deer's. A membranous crest along its spine glowed blue from within, like the abyss. At the withers, the beast was chest-high to a man and 5 paces long. The panel remained silent for a long time. Then it displayed a line, and Aaron read it aloud to Gorton because he couldn't believe his eyes. A unique species, junior water dragon, intelligence comparable to that of a human, capable of serving as a network node, capable of unlimited class growth. The dragon turned its head, looked at Aaron, and Aaron sensed through the connection not the creature's usual warm presence, but a clear question. Who are we? Not who are you? Who are we? Aaron stepped closer, placed his hand on the wet scales, and answered aloud and through the bond at the same time. We are the water that creates. He named the dragon Irvin. By noon, Irvin had taken on the connection to the entire chain of ponds, and the headache that Aaron had been carrying as a constant background for a month vanished for the first time. That evening, a report came from Vec on the coast, and it brought everyone back down to Earth. The ship Iris had been attacked in neutral waters on its return journey. The lady was alive. Her beast had sunk the attackers, but northern runes were found among the wreckage. Morvain began speaking to everyone in his own language a week before the circle, and the registry sent out a clarification of the agenda to the 9 houses. The issue regarding the source was moved from 9th place to 1st. The week before the circle began with good news, and Aaron, out of habit, was already expecting to pay the price for it. Irvin was growing by leaps and bounds. In 3 days, the young dragon had grown to 7 paces, learned from Tolma to understand human speech without a connection, and took over as the second node for the coastal strip, freeing Gruta to focus on healing. The lake had restored a third of the spent on its creation in 4 days, because the network coefficient with the dragon node had skyrocketed. The panel showed a 79% increase in 53 species. At first, the people on the shore were terrified of Irvin, but by the end of the week, children were riding on his tail as he lay on the shallows, and Tolm grumbled that the dragon's deputy had turned out better than he had. The signal came on the 5th day before dawn. Aaron woke not because of the creature's alarm, but because the alarm had vanished. The connection with the 2 distant pawns in the chains snapped silently in a single second, like a severed thread. That's not how they die in battle. In battle, the connection screams. That's how they die, instantly and all at once. Aaron climbed the hill in response to the alarm and set off along the chain with Irvin and the swarm. What they found at the 5th pond, he would remember for the rest of his life. The pond was dead. Not ravaged, dead. The water stood black, and a chill emanated from it, like from a cellar. Crickets, leeches, and the stone-backed watchman all lay on the bottom, intact, without a single wound. The panel responded to the black water with a single word: empty. Not poisoned, not infected, empty. As if the very essence of life had been stripped from the water. The 6th pond was the same, and on the clay between the ponds, a footprint was imprinted, round as if from a pole 2 arm spans wide, and a second one a step away from it. Something enormous had come from the north during the night, taken 2 steps, drained the life from the 2 ponds, and left without touching the village, the people, or the main lakes. Vec, who had arrived around noon, looked at the black water, and for the first time in Irina's memory, she was truly frightened. She said she had read about this in the sealed pages of the registry. The deadly waters of the north. Morvain is the only one of the 9 whose sea neither creates nor nurtures. His sea extinguishes. Its creatures do not kill their prey. They drink away its life force, and to them it makes no difference whether they drink from a human, a beast, or a body of water. The 2 steps across the 2 ponds were not an attack. It was a signature on an invitation to the circle. Morvain was demonstrating exactly what he could do with another's water. Aaron stood above the black pond, and inside him, something was happening that he hadn't allowed himself since the very moment of the transfer. His cold calculation was cracking. He was used to breaking down any threat into parts and finding a creature, an environment, or a deal for each part. But how do you bargain with someone who doesn't want your source? Morvain didn't need a living Aaron with living water. It was more advantageous for the North that the source creator didn't exist at all, because any growth of foreign life devalued his own power of extinction. It was impossible to negotiate with Morvain. One could only survive him. They buried the pond creatures all along the shore. Aaron insisted. At first, people didn't understand why they should bury the crickets, but they all came. He stood over the pit and spoke a few brief words about how these creatures were the first inhabitants of his water, and that the water remembers. Tolm later told Gorton that on that day, the shore finally ceased to be subjects and became a people, and that night, for the first time ever, Aaron broke down. He sat alone by the black pond, trembling. Irvin came silently, lay down beside him in a circle, and remained silent. Then the dragon said something simple through the bond. He said that he felt the ponds like fingers, and that 2 fingers had gone numb, but the hand was alive. Hands grow back from the water that knows how to create. Aaron listened to his 5-day-old dragon, who comforted him with his own faith, and the trembling stopped. In the morning, he announced a new plan. There were 2 days left until the circle, and he spent them not on revenge, but on a vaccination. If the North drinks the essence of life, then he needs a creature from which that essence cannot be drunk in a single gulp, a creature that lives in a dispersed state. He recalled from a past life an organism that reservoir workers both hated and respected at the same time. A colony where thousands of tiny bodies were bound into one, and the death of half did not destroy the whole. He had the blood of a glowing jellyfish, the blood of swarming midges, and the slime of the horde as a binding medium. The mixing process took 2 days, with 11 failed attempts, and for the first time, Aaron wasn't working alone. Irvin kept the water in the right condition with his connection, like a second pair of hands. On the 12th attempt, the lake flared not white, but pearlescent, and a cloud rose to the surface. A living cloud of thousands of glowing bodies bound by a common current, like a single stream of blood. The panel called it swarm water, a unique species number 7, and added the line for which the whole endeavor had been undertaken: distributed life property. It cannot be absorbed by a single impact. Arin commanded the swarm water to divide and flow, a mouthful at a time, into every pond in the chain, into both lakes, and into the quarry. Now his network was grafted. A deadly touch could kill a part, but the whole would survive and regenerate. This did not make him invulnerable. It made him an unprofitable target, and in the language of this world, unprofitable meant protected. That evening, before heading out to the great waters, two figures arrived. First came Gorton, who silently placed a rolled-up map of the deep bowl, with his blood mark in the corner, on a rock. According to the law of the lands, this signified a proposal of a water alliance from the junior to the senior. Gorton, a fourth rank, sought to join the master of the former pond. He said bluntly that he had no intention of waiting for the North to take 2 steps across his lake, and that it was better to be a finger on a living hand than a separate, dead finger. Arin accepted the map, and the phrase, Allied Waters, appeared on the panel for the first time. The second to arrive was Ossian, carrying a package from Iris. The ruler of the East confirmed the archive and the contract, and inside the package, on a separate sheet, lay an excerpt marked as the first page of what had been promised. Arin read it by the campfire, and his face grew stiff. It was a protocol of the Maritime Circle from a century ago. 100 years ago, 9 rulers had already considered the issue of the creative source, the fourth, the last before Arin. The council's decision was recorded in a single line. Recognize the source as a threat to equilibrium. Entrust its elimination to the Northern House. At the bottom of the page, Iris had added 3 words in her own handwriting. This time, we'll vote differently. Arin stared into the fire for a long time. 100 years ago, these very same chairs had already voted once for the death of someone like him, and the North had already carried out that sentence once. Morvain did not improvise. Morvain repeated the procedure. In the morning, Arin set out for the Great Water. The entire shore saw him off. The pile stood on the hill like a gray mountain. Tolm kept his word that the chain of ponds would remain intact. Vec walked with him as a representative of the registry. And at the water's edge, Irvin was waiting for him. Having grown to 9 paces in a week, with a saddle made of spider silk that the women of the shore had woven without being asked. The dragon said through the bond that a node of the web could exist at any distance as long as the node remained close to its master. Arin mounted the saddle. Behind him lay his waters, 54 species, 7 unique, 2 lakes, a chain of ponds, the Allied Bowl, and the black pits of 2 destroyed ponds, like an unpaid debt. Ahead, 3 days' journey away, lay the Great Water, where 9 chairs would decide whether he would live or repeat the protocol of a century past. Arin tugged on the reins and spoke aloud, so that both the people and the dragon could hear him. He said that 100 years ago, the 4th spring had no voice at the table. The 5th spring would have a voice. The Great Water turned out to be a circular bay encircled by white cliffs, where no one's territory lay. 9 docks in a circle, 9 tents, 9 flags. There was no 10th pier, and Arin immediately understood the language of the stone. The world of the 9 had not provided for a 10th. Irvin emerged from the waves right at the entrance to the bay, carrying Arin in the saddle, and that was enough to silence the conversations at the docks. The people of the 9 houses looked at the young dragon with pearlescent scales, and Vec, walking beside him, whispered that half the battle was won before a single word was spoken. Weapons were forbidden within the circle, but no one even thinked to forbid arriving on the back of an argument. The lords gathered in an open hall on a flat rock in the middle of the bay. Arin studied them while the formalities were underway. Draven, with his salt-streaked hair, nodded to him as an ally. Iris, with her white coral, was reading something without looking up. Cassid, a scarred southerner, looked at Irvin with the gaze of a weapons dealer. The other 5 displayed varying degrees of curiosity and contentment, and standing apart from the rest was Morvain. The ruler of the North was a gaunt man dressed in gray, without a single ornament, and even the water of the bay seemed darker near his peer. He was the only one who did not glance at the dragon even once. The question of the water source was raised first. The circle's administrator, the senior among all the pool, he read aloud a dry report. In 2 months, the unaccounted-for body of water had grown from the lowest rank to that of a large lake encompassing Allied territory. 7 species not listed in the World Registry had been created. Victories over creatures up to the rank of minor sea creature had been recorded. The precedent was assessed as unprecedented. Then the floor was given to the Pooh. Cassid spoke first and spoke plainly. A source like this is an armory. An armory cannot be left without an owner. He proposed a division of control. The source would operate on a full-cycle basis according to quotas, while the lands surrounding it would come under joint management. Arin listened as they divided his water and remained silent because Vec had taught him order. The guest speaks last. 2 of the well-fed supported Cassid. Iris looked up from her notes and spoke 4 sentences. She said that joint management of the source had already been tried 100 years ago, that it ended with the decision to eliminate it, that the elimination cost the world a loss of knowledge that has not been restored to this day, and that she proposed the circle recognize the source as the 9.5 house, with its own vote and its own obligations. The hall grew noisy. Draven supported Iris and added remarks about the existing alliance and airtight contracts. The debate was heading toward a vote, and the count was looking shaky. And then, for the first time, Morvain spoke. He spoke quietly, and everyone fell silent to listen. He said that the esteemed houses were arguing over what to call an abscess. An abscess isn't named. An abscess is lanced. The creative water grows faster than any sea, and in a year, this spring will outgrow its boundaries. The panel had predicted this to Aaron himself, and Aaron grew cold at how precisely the North knew the contents of his panel. Morvain continued. In a year, the spring will reach the limits of the land. In 2 years, it will begin to encroach on others' territory. Not because the owner is angry, but because such is the nature of growth. The circle can wait until the water reaches their throats, or they can decide now, while it's still knee-deep. He didn't propose a vote. He proposed something else, and that's when it became clear why he had been destroying the ponds. The law of the Great Water allowed for a trial instead of a vote if the issue concerned a threat to the balance. A trial of the creatures, like a trial by combat, but with the circle stakes at stake. Morvain pitted his beast against any creature of the source. A victory for the North meant recognizing the source as a threat and enforcing the protocol. A victory for the source meant home status and a seat at the table. He turned to Aaron for the first time that day and added that he was granting the weakest water the right to refuse and come under joint governance, as Cassida had said. The trap had been set neatly. Refusal would make Arena's property. Consent would pit everything created over the past 2 months against a beast about which Arena knew only one thing. This beast drank life and had already drunk his water. Arena asked to see the creature of the North before answering, and the overseer confirmed that right. Morvain gestured with his hand. The water at the northern pier did not swell but settled, as if there were less of it. And from this settled water rose a beast at the sight of which the people of all 9 houses recoiled. It resembled a whale from which all life had been stripped away. A gray, smooth body 20 men long, without eyes or a mouth, with a single vertical slit running along its head. Around it, the water lost its luster, and fish floated belly up simply from being in its vicinity. The arena panel reached out to the beast and wrote what it had already figured out on its own. Devourer of properties, highest C rank. Contact with the owner's link is not recommended. The last line was the most important. This creature could devour more than just a being. If it reached the connection itself, Aren would have ended up like the 4th source 100 years ago, not by claws, but from within. Irvin tensed beside him, and Aren sensed his fear through the connection, and, over that fear, a readiness. The dragon said he would go out. Aren replied through the connection with a single word, no. He stared at the gray devourer, and in his mind, with the cold precision of an old habit, he analyzed the problem. How do you take down one who drinks life, with something that has no life in one place? Swarm water. But the swarm won't kill a 20-meter carcass. It will only ensure its own survival. How do you kill one who cannot be wounded by a living being? With the environment. Like an elodroba, like a snake. But here the water is foreign, and a field cannot be built overnight. And then his thoughts turned to the third question, one he had never asked before. What does the devourer itself drink when it drinks? It drinks a property. So its slit is an entrance. Everything the beast encounters, it draws into itself. A creature programmed to devour has no defense against what is dangerous to swallow. In a past life, Aaron had seen a massive predatory fish killed by a small creature it had swallowed, one with a poisonous fang. Not in battle, from the inside. The plan turned out to be terrifyingly simple, and had one flaw. Aaron didn't have a creature with indigestible contents with him. He had to create one, here, overnight. It couldn't be done using foreign water. But according to the rules of the trial, the opposing side was given 24 hours to prepare and transport a fighter from their own territory. 24 hours. It was a 3-day journey to the hill. Aaron looked at Irvin, and the dragon understood before a word was spoken. The network node works at a distance only if the node is near its master. And if the master is near the node, where is the limit of what can be done through the node using native water? No one had tried this before, and the panel responded to the direct question with a gray line. No precedent exists. Aaron turned to the circle and accepted the trial. He asked for a day and set the conditions for the trial. The trial would take place in the Bay of Great Water in full view of all 9 houses, so that no one could dispute the outcome. Morvain agreed with the ease of a man confident in his victory. That night, at the far pier, Aaron sat back to back with Irvin, placed his palms on the dragon's scales, and closed his eyes. The dragon became a bridge. The connection stretched 3 days' journey away like a thin string, to the Great Lake, to Gruta, to the swarm waters, to all 54 species. The distance cut through the connection like a knife, and blood flowed from Aaron's nose once more, but the string held. He saw his lake through the eyes of the bottomless one. He felt the water as if it were his own palms, and he began the mixture 3 days' journey away. The blood of the thunderous miner, the blood of a healing leech whose saliva prevents the blood from clotting. Swarm water, like a living foundation that cannot be drunk in a single gulp, and the blood of the devourer, which he did not possess, but he had the scorched black silt from the slain pawns, gathered by Tolm on his orders before he left. A trace of the North's essence, a vaccine against the one who will devour. The lake glowed with mother of pearl all night, 3 days' journey from here, and Vec, sitting next to Aaron, wiped the blood from his face and told him he had gone mad. By dawn, a creature emerged from the water on that shore, which Gruta led toward the sea by the shortest route, accompanied by Gorton and half the shore. And Aaron, his eyes wide open on the pier of the great gray water, a gray streak on his left temple, told the administrator that his fighter would arrive on time. The panel remained silent until noon. At noon, it came to life and issued confirmation. Unique species number 8, created remotely via the node. The precedent has been entered into the registry. The species name has been approved by the owner. Aaron named it Throat of the Storm. In the evening, people from the 9 houses stood on the white cliffs surrounding the bay. Morvain gazed at the empty water where the trial of the creatures was supposed to begin that morning. Iris looked at Aaron, and Aaron stood at the edge, his hand on Irvin's neck, listening through the bond as his answer, unforeseen by the North, flowed from the west toward the great water via rivers and channels. His water had learned today what none of the 9 knew. It had learned to reach out. The throat of the storm entered the great water bay at dawn, and the 9 houses saw it all at once. The creature bore no resemblance to anything in the registries. Its long body, half the length of the devourer's, seemed to be fashioned from fluid mother of pearl, within which swarmed thousands of luminous particles of a swarm-like substance. Bony arcs of the miner stretched along its sides. The creature had no mouth at all, only a smooth head with a single dark spot on its forehead. The house panel tried to read it, but could only produce fragments. Unique species, distributed life, internal properties hidden. Morvain stared at the arena fighter for a long time, and for the first time in a round, something stirred in his gray face. He did not understand what stood before him, and for someone who built his strength on precise knowledge of others' properties, this lack of understanding was the first wound inflicted even before the battle began. The referee announced the conditions: a trial to the death for one of the creatures. Interference by the owners was prohibited except for communication. The battlefield was the entire bay. The match would begin with a strike on the bone plate. Aaron stood on a white cliff with Irvin behind him, reviewing the plan one last time. The plan was terrifying in its simplicity. The throat of the storm didn't know how to fight. It knew only one thing: how to be swallowed properly. Its entire body was filling, a swarm-based substance that couldn't be consumed in a single dose. Leech saliva permeating every tissue, from which a foreign womb would be unable to stop the internal bleeding. And the main cargo, a minor charge distributed along the bony arches, not by a single blow, but by 100 small nodes. From the outside, the charge was useless against a carcass weighing 20 men. From the inside, where there was neither water nor armor, only the living tissue of the devourer, it became a death sentence. The black silt of the slain pawns, woven into the fabric, made the tissues of the storm's throat taste almost like the very essence of the North. The devourer was not supposed to sense poison in food that smelled of his own handiwork. The impact of the plate echoed across the bay. The devourer of properties set off immediately. He did not walk quickly, for he never needed to hurry. Around him, the water lost its luster in a 10-step wide band, and this dead band crept toward the storm's throat like the shadow of a cloud. The creature arena did not flee. It slowly retreated toward the center of the bay, flickering, and the flickering grew erratic, as if the beast were weakening from mere proximity. That, too, was part of the plan. The swarm's core was voluntarily extinguishing its outer bodies, feigning death. A predator does not swallow whole those who are strong. A predator swallows those who are already nearly consumed. The rocks were silent. Cassid said aloud that the source warrior was already dead, and that there was nothing left to watch. Iris didn't answer and didn't look away. She alone, it seemed, was thinking the same thing as Aren. distance, angle, approach speed. The devourer reached its prey and hovered over it like a gray mountain. The vertical slit along its head opened, and the bay shuddered. The slit didn't bite, it pulled. The creature's water, light, and very essence flowed into the gray body through a funnel. The storm's throat flickered one last time and allowed the funnel to swallow it whole. The 20-meter-long carcass closed the slit. On the cliffs, someone exhaled. Morvain turned to the commander to demand acknowledgement of the outcome. And at that moment, Aaron, through the bond that held even through another's womb, issued the sole command of this battle. Burn. 100 knots of Minoria discharged simultaneously inside the devourer. From the outside, it looked like this. A gray mountain rose vertically above the water, in a way that even whales do not. Branched flashes coursed through its smooth body from within, making the flesh glow blue. Then the body crashed flat, sending a wave all the way to the docks. The devourer thrashed for a quarter of an hour. It tried to expel its prey, but the leech's saliva had already spread through its veins, and whatever was tearing apart inside would not close. It tried to swallow the killer inside itself, but the swarm's core could not be taken in a single gulp, and it no longer had the life left for 1,000 gulps. It fell silent, a long and labored process, and the entire bay watched in silence, because, before the eyes of 9 houses, the beast that had been considered invincible for 100 years was dying. When the gray body sank to the bottom and the band of death around it faded, a cloud of pearlescent bodies floated out from the crevice, tattered, halved, alive. The throat of the storm gathered on the surface, taking on a semblance of its former form, and turned the dark patch of its head toward the cliff where its creator stood. The ringmaster announced the outcome in a trembling voice. The trial is complete. The creature of the north is dead. The creature of the source is alive. By the law of the great water, the source is recognized as a home, with a place and a voice. What followed was what Aaron remembered in fragments, the roar of Draven's people, Iris, rising from her seat for the first time to bow her head, Cassid, whose tone suddenly shifted from that of a buyer to that of an ally, and the silence of the northern pier, where Morwain stood above the water in which his century-old beast lay. The Lord of the North did not say a word. He boarded his gray boat, and his house withdrew from the circle until the end of the assembly, which, by all accounts, signified a rejection of the outcome. Vec whispered to Arin that no one had done such a thing in 300 years. The North had not lost. The North had stepped outside the rules. That evening, in the hall on the cliff, the 9 chairs became 10. The 10th was carved from white stone right there in front of everyone, and Arin, sitting on it, listened as the administrator read aloud the rights and obligations of the new house. The House of the Spring, the right to vote, the right to the inviolability of its borders, the duty to respond to the Circle's inquiries regarding the creative waters. He listened, and through the thread of connection, felt how, 3 days' journey from here, his lake breathed evenly, and how Gruda on the shore raised her head as if she too could hear. After the meeting, Iris approached him. She placed a white coral key on the table and said that her house's archive was open to him in its entirety, not just page by page. She said that 100 years ago she had voted for the elimination of the 4th source and had spent the last 100 years reading about what the world had lost. She added nothing more and walked back to the ship. That night, Arin couldn't sleep. He sat on the pier next to the storm's throat, which was restoring the Tellets in foreign but no longer hostile waters, and mulled over the day's gains in his mind. He had received the status of a seat, a voice, and immunity on paper. He had shown the 9 houses a distant creation, and now all 9 knew that his waters extended 3 days' journey away. Power was no longer a secret, and open power is an open list of reasons to fear you. And there was the North. Morvain had lost the beast's face and the age-old order. Such losses are neither forgiven nor mourned. Such losses are repaid. In the morning, as the House of the Spring was preparing to return, the first news arrived from the northern horizon. Fishermen from neutral waters reported that the Dead Sea had set out from its mooring during the night. Not the beast, the sea itself. The gray waters of the north moved en masse from their shores toward the south, and wherever they passed, the water behind them remained empty. The arena panel received the registry broadcast and displayed it to everyone standing nearby. An emergency notification to all houses. The northern ruler has set the main body of water in motion. Direction of movement, southwest. Estimated destination. Aren looked at the last line and wasn't surprised. The line listed the coordinates of his hill. The return journey turned into a race against the map. The Sea of Morvain flowed through the lowlands and old riverbeds at the speed of a man on foot, never resting, because still water needs no rest. According to Vec's calculations, the North would reach Arena's lands in 12 days. Riding Irvin, Arena made it in 2. Even from the ridge of the hills, he could see that the news had overtaken him. People were streaming along the roads toward his lakes. Not dozens, hundreds. The owners of the small bodies of water, with their families, their belongings, and water from their ponds poured into wineskins, were straying from the expected northern route and heading where, according to rumors, the water knew how to defend itself. Tolm met him at the chain of ponds, his face darkened by worry, and reported briefly. 400 people had arrived. More were on the way. There was enough food for 10 days. After that, famine. Aron convened a council that very hour, and the council was no longer a hill council, but a regional command center. Draven, who had sent the messenger, promised ships to evacuate the coast. Gorton designated the Deep Bowl as the second line of defense. To everyone's surprise, Cassid sent a grain convoy and a mercenary detachment from the south, stating that the House of the Spring was now an ally in the circle, and that the south feeds its allies. Iris did not send grain. She sent an archive. 3 chests of bone plates under guard and a single-line letter. Look for the chapter on how the third source died. Aron read it at night between tasks. The story of the third source turned out to be one not of defeat, but of suicide. The third master of the creative waters faced the enemy as nature itself, the source of his power, had dictated. He grew ever larger bodies of water and ever larger creatures until his bond came to sustain an entire realm of life. And then the enemy simply waited. The bond overpowered its master, just as the first plate had foretold. The third source burned out a week before the battle, and his entire realm of life, left without its hub, collapsed on its own. Aron closed the tablet and sat motionless for a long time. Morvain led his sea slowly, not because he couldn't go faster. He was applying pressure. He was forcing Aron, in a panic, to expand the network to the point of self-destruction. The dead water might not even reach him. It was enough for Aron to meet it as he had met everything before. With growth. So the response had to be something other than growth. Aron went out to the people in the morning and announced a decision that left the command staff speechless. He would not expand the network until the battle. He would cut it back. All the pawns in the chain would receive full autonomy under overseers. Irvin would take the lakes. A second node was needed immediately, and it would not be a beast. A month ago, after Irvin's creation, the panel revealed a hidden entry that Aron hadn't shown to anyone. A human who voluntarily mixes their blood with the owner's water can become a node. The price is undetermined. He told the command staff about this honestly, including the part about the undetermined price. 4 volunteered: Tolm, Vec, and Gorton. And Tolm's wife, the herbalist Seda, about whom Aron knew only that half the shore was being treated with her decoctions. Aron refused Vec because the registry must not belong to a single house. He refused Gorton because the chalice itself is the bond of the alliance. He chose Tolm and Seda. The ritual was simple and terrifying. 2 drops of blood into the lake's water, followed by a sip of that water. Tolm rose from his knees, half gray-haired yet steadfast. Seda lost consciousness for a day, and upon waking, she said quietly that she could now hear every pond as if it were a child in the house. The network settled into 3 nodes, and the string in Aron's head loosened to a mere thread. Now, even if the North were to take half of its lands, the remaining half would stand on its own. Then began 10 days that were later called, on the shore, the time of the Great Mixing. Aron was not preparing an army. An army against the sea is pointless. He was preparing a remedy. From the Iris archives, specifically the chapter on the nature of deadly waters, he extracted the most important points. The Grey Sea was not dead. It was a living being turned inside out. Just as its swarm water was a colony that consumed properties, so too was the colony that carried them. 2 opposing colonies. And opposites in living water do not merely wage war. They balance each other out if a binding agent is found. The connecting link was the blood of the storm's throat, a creature that had ventured into the north and emerged alive. Its calves now carried the memory of both natures. Aron blended the final form with everything he had. Swarm water as the body, the blood of the storm's throat as memory, Gruda's slime as mercy, because Seda said a strange thing that Aron heeded. She said that the water that had drunk everything could not be killed. It could only be quenched. 11 failures. 3 weeks of effort. The lake receded by a quarter and replenished itself overnight through the power of the entire network. On the 12th attempt, the water did not burst into flames, but began to sing. A low, steady tone rippled through all the ponds, across both lakes, and through the bowl, and people emerged from their huts to listen. From the depths rose the ninth creature, unique and the last in this war. It resembled a gigantic mother-of-pearl water lily, 100 paces wide, with leaves, roots, and bodies extending throughout the entire network at once. The panel took a long time to write its name, as if choosing its words carefully. A unique species, a life-giving source, a balancing colony, capable of transforming the waters it absorbs into neutral ones. Its radius of action equals its area of contact. The last line was a death sentence for the defense plan. The radius equals the contact area. The water lily could not be sent out to meet it. The gray sea had to flow into his lands on its own and cover the spring's roots with itself. Arin had to let death into the house so that the house could digest it. The command staff argued until they were hoarse. Gorton shouted that it was madness. Vec calculated the odds and remained silent. Tolm asked only one thing. Would the pawns hold out during the first few hours while the spring was still flowing? Arin answered honestly that he didn't know, and that everyone not bound to the water would board Draven's ships before the North arrived. The evacuation lasted 3 days. The shore emptied. Only those bound to the water remained. Arin, the 3 knots, and the creature's guardians. On the 11th day, the sentinel crickets on the northern ridge fell silent, and by midday, Arin saw from the hill what only the third spring had seen before him. The horizon turned gray, not from clouds, but from the water. The Dead Sea was sweeping across his land in a wide tongue a verst wide, covering riverbeds and dried-up ravines, and first and foremost, the distant black pond that had once killed him himself. Ahead of the tongue, there were neither beasts nor waves, only a strip where the grass lay white. And at the very edge of the gray, on a low dune, stood a man in gray, without a boat and without guards. Morvain had come on foot ahead of his sea. He stopped a stone's throw from the first pond and stood motionless, gazing at the hill. He waited. And Arin, coming down to meet him with Irvin on his left, realized that the North was offering him one last conversation, not out of mercy, out of procedure. 100 years ago, the fourth source had surely been offered the chance to surrender before the execution as well. They met on the strip of ground, white with dead grass, between the gray water and the first pond. Up close, Morvain turned out to be older than he had appeared in the circle, and his eyes were not malicious, but weary, like those of a man who had been doing the same job for 100 years. He spoke first, and he spoke without threats, because threats are made by those who do not have the sea at their back. He said he had not come for Arin, he had come for balance. Creative water is not a gift, but a disease of the world. He had seen 4 such springs. Each had begun with a single drop and good intentions. Each grew into a land of life that devoured its neighbor's space, not out of malice, but by nature. Arena's own panel had already foretold a shortage of land. In 10 years, his water would reach the borders. In 20, his grandchildren, or his dragons, would go to take what belonged to others. And they would be right in their own way, because life wants to live. The North exists to prevent this from happening. The North is not death. The North is the shore. He offered Arin one last choice, to leave alone. Morvain's sea would drink only the water, leaving the creatures untouched, neither people nor neighbors. Arin would receive life and a place in any of the realms. The world would gain another 100 years of balance. Arin listened to the end without interrupting. Then he replied, speaking calmly as well, because water stood behind him too. He said that Morvain was right about almost everything. Unlimited growth does indeed end in a war for space. He had seen it in a past life, in glass containers where an overpopulated system devoured itself. But the North has been treating this disease with amputation for 100 years because it knows no other cure. Yet, there is a cure. It is neither growth nor suppression. Balance is achieved not by killing off the excess, but by closing the circle. Water that only creates is doomed. Water that only drinks is doomed as well, because one day it will drink everything and die of hunger. He asked Morvain what would become of the North when the world ran out of substances that could be drunk. The ruler remained silent. Arin concluded simply, he will not leave. But he does not offer a fight either. He offers the North a way in. Let the gray sea flow where it was headed, and let Morvain himself see what will happen when 2 opposing waters meet, not in war, but in a single channel. If Arin's lands fall, the North will depart unscathed and without loss. If not, the North will find the cure it has sought for 100 years, without even knowing it. Morvain stared at him for a long time. Then he said that the fourth source had also spoken beautifully before his death, and he raised his hand. The gray sea began to move. Arin remembered what followed as the longest night of his life, even though it all happened during the day. Dead water flowed into the first pond, and the pond went dark. The stoneback keeper sank to the bottom before Aron could sever the connection. Tolm, on his knot, gasped as if struck in the ribs. A gray tongue ran along the chain's channel, and the second pond went dark as well. The swarm graft kept the creatures alive longer, but not indefinitely. Gorton, on the ridge, clenched his spear, more useless than ever, and the source was silent. The water lily's roots lay throughout the entire network, but the gray had not yet reached its leaf in the Great Lake, and the radius was equal to the contact. Time was the deciding factor, and Aron counted it by the extinguished ponds. The third, the fourth. At the fifth, the first miracle occurred, and it was a small one. The pond went dark, but an hour later, the pearlescent droplets of swarm water within it stirred again. Too little of the north had reached the edge of the tongue to drain the distributed life dry. The dead and the living hung in equilibrium in a single basin, and the water in the fifth pond became neither gray nor clear, but pearlescent. The panel displayed a line that wasn't in the registers. A mixed state of water detected. Properties are balanced. Morvain, standing on the dune, took a step forward and, for the first time, looked not at Aron, but at the pearlescent water. But this was the edge of the tongue. The main mass of the gray sea reached the large lake by sunset, and entered it across its entire front. This is where the main event began, and no one saw the main event because it was happening underwater. Aron sat on the shore between Tolm and Seda, holding both of their hands, linking 3 knots into a single ring, and through that ring, he sensed a battle that was not a battle. The gray was sawing. The spring was drinking. The dead colony drew life from the roots of the water lily, and the roots, through the memory of the blood in the storm's throat, yielded without resistance. And in every gulp of the north, a drop of memory dissolved, a memory of how to be alive. The lake grew dark. Then it grew light. Then it spread in pearlescent streaks like oil on water. Irvin stood in the water up to his crest, and held the knot's connection, even as the gray embraced his paws. The mass lay on the shallows, and its slime trickled into the water around the clock. By midnight, Aron could no longer tell where he ended and the web began. Seda later recounted that he had been speaking aloud in 2 voices. By dawn, the moment had come, the one Aron knew would come and feared more than death itself. The balance between the 2 colonies hung in the balance. There was more dead water. The living water was more cohesive, and for the scales to tip, a little extra weight was needed, a single quality of such wholeness that no other creature possessed. Only the owners possessed that quality of living wholeness. Aron stood up. Tolm was the first to realize it, and clung to his hand. Aron gently pried his fingers loose and told both knots to hold the net no matter what, then stepped into the pearly water himself. He walked along the bottom until the water closed over his head, and then he opened the connection wide. Not to 40 beings, as in the quarry, to all of them, to every body of swarming water, to every root of the source, and through the throat of the storm, to every drop of the gray sea that was now drinking him in directly. The pain was so intense that his body ceased to matter. He did not resist. He did what Seda had told him to do. He drank. He gave back to the gray everything that was his. The memory of the glass reservoirs, the warmth of the she-wolf mother he'd never had, but who was in the blood of the creatures that had passed through his water. The first drop of the spring, the gnat that had shielded him with its body. He poured himself into the Dead Sea like medicine and felt how, at the other end, a century-old thirst drank, for the first time, not a property, but a meaning. And the Dead Sea stirred. It stopped drinking because, for the first time, it had been quenched. Across the entire verst of the front, across all the ponds and lakes, the gray and the pearlescent curled into one another like 2 hands clasped in a lock, and the water turned pearly from edge to edge. Irvin carried Arena ashore. He hadn't breathed for 2 minutes, and Gruda was squeezing the water out of his chest, while Seda poured her potions into his mouth. He opened his eyes at dawn, and the first thing he saw was the sky with 2 moons, and the second was Morvain's face. The Lord of the North stood over him, knee-deep in the pearly water that did not extinguish him and that he could not drink. He held that water in his palms and looked at it as one looks at what they have sought all their life. He spoke softly, not to Arena, but to the water. He said that for 100 years he had been mistaken about one word. Balance is not the shore. Balance is the mouth of the river. The world after the pearly night did not become quiet. It became different, and what is different is always louder than silence. Aron spent the first 10 days between sleep and reports because his body, scorched in the lake, refused to function. His left temple remained gray forever. The connection did not return immediately, and when it did, it returned strangely. He no longer heard the network as a string stretched out from himself. He heard it as a river, in which he himself was one of the currents. The knots held. Tolm walked along the shore, and you could tell by his face that he could now hear the ponds even in his sleep. Seda was healing, and her decoctions infused with pearl water were reviving patients who would previously have been buried. And Irvin had grown by a decade to 15 paces, and the panel removed the word youngest from his description. The pearl water turned out to be not the end, but the beginning of the task. It was stable. It neither faded nor grew wildly out of control. The creatures living in it lived longer and fell ill less often, but it changed the rules for everyone. The deadly creatures of the north that had entered it from the sea did not die. They stopped drinking it dry and began to graze, taking only the excess from the water. Gray shadows now roamed among the pearlescent water lilies like cattle in a meadow, and the children of the shore, who had returned from Draven's ships, stopped fearing them within a decade. Morvain did not leave. He pitched a gray tent on the dune by the former first pond and lived there alone, as he apparently always had. Every morning he came to the pearly water and stood there for a long time. Then he began to speak with Aaron. Not about politics, about water. He told him things that weren't in the Iris archives, that the North hadn't always been dead, that 1,000 years ago its sea had also been creating, until its first ruler grew afraid of its own growth and began to drink itself so as not to grow. That every generation of the North since then had inherited not strength, but fear. Aaron listened and realized he was speaking with the last guardian of this world's oldest wound. 2 decades later, they did something that made the registry gasp. The House of the Spring and the House of the North signed a treaty on mixed waters. Morvain diverted the bulk of his sea back home, but left a channel connected to Aaron's lands as a permanent waterway. The mouth, as he called it, the place where two natures hold each other. In exchange, the North gained access to the pearl water and the right to send its creatures out to graze. Vec, who certified the treaty, said that in 300 years of service, she had never seen a document stranger or more necessary. The Circle reacted as any authority reacts to a new balance of power. Nervously. Cassid sent a request to purchase water in barrels and received a refusal, with the explanation that, disconnected from the network, it becomes ordinary within a decade. 2 well-fed houses filed a complaint that the alliance between the Source and the North disrupts the balance of power, and Iris sailed in herself for the second time. She walked along the shore all day, touching the water, reading the display panel, and watching the gray grazing creatures and the children beside them. In the evening, she told Irina 2 things. The first was a thank you. The 5th Source had closed the account she'd been paying off with wine for 100 years. The second was a warning. The Circle is convening an extraordinary meeting. The reason is a complaint from the houses. But the real issue that will hang over the table is another. The world has seen that Irina's water is capable of altering the nature of an entire sea. Today, he brought balance to the North by mutual consent. Tomorrow, he will be able to bring balance to anyone without consent. Pearl water is a power more fearsome than armies, and the 9 houses will decide what to do with that power. Aaron listened and caught himself smiling wearily. Each of his victories gave rise to a greater problem. He defeated a puddle and gained a wave. He defeated the wave and gained a ruler. He defeated the ruler and gained the circle. He defeated the circle and gained the North. Now, he had defeated the very death of water itself and gained the fear of the entire world as his adversary. The staircase seemed endless, but for the first time, he looked at the next step without malice. He was preparing for the assembly not as a trial, but as a lesson he himself would lead. For 3 decades, the lands of Aaron had worked as a single workshop. Together with Morvain and the Iris Archive, he wrote what had never existed in this world, the Charter of Mixed Waters, a code of rules by which any 2 houses could create a confluence, the voluntary union of both waters. Knots on both sides, a limit on growth inscribed within the channel itself. He embedded in the charter the most important thing he had understood in this life and the last. A system is alive not when it defeats its neighbors, but when it forms a circle with them. Predator and prey, creation and extinction, growth and limits. Remove either one, and the water will die, either from starvation or from its own hand. After accepting the text of the charter, the panel opened a section that Aaron had never seen before, and the section's title took his breath away. The Owner's Legacy. Inside was a single line. Knowledge formalized by the owner and accepted by other houses becomes the property of the world and does not die with the owner's death. That was what distinguished the fifth source from the four that had burned down. They nurtured the water. He nurtured a rule. Rules are not to be drunk or burned. Just before leaving for the assembly, an event occurred that Aaron later called the true end of the war, even though the war had been over for a month. At dawn, the sentries sounded the alarm at the mouth of the river. From the mixed riverbed, a creature that no one had created crawled out onto the shoal. Neither Aaron, nor the system, nor the North. It was born of its own accord in the pearly water, where the gray calves and the mother-of-pearl ones had lived for a month in the same current. A small creature the size of a cat, translucent, with a gray back and a glowing belly. It drank water and exhaled it back out, pure. The panel pondered it longer than it had the dragon. Then it produced a line that Aaron read aloud to Morvain, Tolm, Side, and everyone who had gathered. New species. Origin. Spontaneous generation in balanced waters. No owner. The creature is free. Morvain knelt down in the sand to get a better look at the little creature, and for the first time, Aaron saw the Lord of the North smile. Water that had been considered death for 1,000 years, and water that had been feared as unbridled life, had together given birth to a third. Free, belonging to no one, alive. Aaron did not tie the creature down, and forbade anyone else from doing so. Let there be at least one species in the world that belongs to no one. As he walked toward the great water, he looked back from the ridge. Pearl-like lakes stretched to the horizon, connected by channels like the vessels of a single body. A gray tent on a dune, the dragon's shadow and on the shoal, a village that had become a small town, and a tiny, ownerless creature on a rock at the mouth of the river. All of this had sprung up from a single drop in a single moment. One last thing remained, to convince the 9 frightened houses that the staircase of fear had an end, and Aaron already knew how he would convince them. Not by force, nor by a beast, by the charter and an open palm. The special meeting opened in the same hall on the cliff, but the hall was different. 10 chairs. Pearl Bay lay behind them because the remnants of the storm that had lingered in the open waters over these past months had imperceptibly brought it into balance as well. The 9 rulers looked at the 10th, and Aaron read their faces like a control panel. Fear in the 2 who were well-fed, calculation in Cassid, anticipation in Iris and Draven, and a calmness distinct from all the others in Morvain, who sat not on the northern chair but on the bench next to the 10th. The complaint was read aloud. Its essence boiled down to 3 words, which the administrator uttered with visible awkwardness. The source had become immeasurable. The houses requested that the circle establish boundaries for the house of the source, extending all the way to the division of its waters. Aaron was given the floor last, and he stepped into the center of the hall, without Irvin, without creatures, and without papers, save for a single bone tablet. He did not speak for long. He said that the houses were right. An immeasurable power was a threat, and he himself would fear himself if he were in their place. 100 years ago, that fear had already resolved the issue through elimination, and the world had received a century of peace and dead pawns in the north. He proposed another solution, and asked them not to take his word for it, but to do the math. He placed the Charter of Mixed Waters on the table, and announced 3 articles that concerned him personally. First, the House of the Spring voluntarily sets a limit on its own growth. Its waters will never exceed their current boundaries plus the allied watercourses. Any excess growth will forever flow not into expansion, but into the estuaries. Second, any house may obtain the right to an estuary by contract. The source undertakes to provide mixed channels to all who wish them on equal terms, and to train teams of people from each house. Third, knowledge of the creation of species ceases to be the secret of one. Aren provides the circle with an open registry of all his mixtures, proportions, and failures. Everything except that which cannot be revealed. The owner's bond with water, which, as the spy Iris revealed, cannot be stolen or copied. The hall was silent for a long time. Cassid was the first to speak, asking what benefit Aren stood to gain by giving all this away for free. Aren replied with the truth he had gleaned from his 2 lives. In the glass reservoir of his past world, the richest vessel perished first if it stood alone. Those that were connected survived. He does not give away power. He transforms it from his own into a shared one, because a shared one does not need to be guarded from everyone. His limit to growth is not a sacrifice. It is his own defense against the fate of the third source, which burned out under the weight of a boundless network. The mouth is not a gift to the houses. It is 9 reasons for each house to cherish its lands as part of its own. Morvain rose from the bench and spoke 4 sentences that finally silenced the hall. He said that for 1,000 years, the North had been the knife of the circle. that the knife now sees, for the first time, a task that cannot be accomplished by a knife, that the House of the North would be the first to sign the charter, and that if any house ever decided to take the spring's water by force, that house would first have to explain its intentions to the estuary, which by that time would be flowing through its own lands. The vote was open, 9 in favor. The Charter of Mixed Waters became the law of the Great Water, and the arena panel lit up the moment it was announced, displaying a line which it was worth traveling the entire path from a single drop. The legacy was accepted by the world. The owner's knowledge was incorporated into the world's properties. The status was irreversible. From then on, time marched forward in great strides, and Arena did not resist this because, for the first time, there was nowhere to rush to. In the first year, the estuaries reached the Sea of Draven, and, to the east, Iris. By the third year, the mixed waterways had reached the south, and Cassid grumbled that the pearl water had ruined his entire arms trade because there was no longer any reason to fight. In the 5th year, the first Council of Knots was convened on Arin's lands, where people from the 9 houses learned to listen to the water, and Seda presided over it as the elder. The long Lake Harlan, purchased by Tolm from its impoverished owner, became a school for watchers. Gorton had grown old and plump, and he would tell the children by the campfires how he had personally seen the puddle from which it all began, but the children didn't believe him. Irvin had grown to a size at which the measuring panel could no longer indicate his length, and he led the younger dragons, whom Arin had created for his lineage, along the waterways. There were now 11 free, self-generated species at the mouths, and according to the charter, they belonged to no one. Morvain died quietly in his tent on a dune in his 9th year. Before his death, he asked Arin for one thing, to pour his blood into the mouth, not to create a copy, as a memorial. Arin complied, and from then on, once a year for one night, the water in the first estuary turned silvery, and the northerners came to it in silence. Arin sensed he had reached his limit in the 12th year. It was neither illness nor old age. It was simply that one morning he heard the network not as a river in which it flows, but as a shore from which it gazes. The water had learned everything he could give it. He tied the knots and calmly announced that he was severing the direct connection. The ritual was the reverse of the ancient one. He returned a drop of blood to the lake and did not take a sip in return. The connection thinned to a warm thread, and the network didn't even flinch, because it had long since been sustained not by him, but by the rule he had embedded within it. The panel unfolded before him one last time, spanning its full width. Owner of the source. Status changed. Founder. 86 system waters. Species 412. Unique 19. Available 11. Main body of water class achieved. Living ocean. Growth limit set by owner. System is stable without an owner. Arin read the last line twice. System is stable without an owner. Those 4 words encapsulated his entire victory. Not in the ocean, but in the fact that the ocean no longer needed him. On the final evening of this story, he came alone to the top of his hill. The little town below glowed with lights. Pearl-white water stretched to the horizon in every direction, merging into the neighboring seas without any seams or boundaries visible to the eye. Somewhere in the depths, dragons slept. Somewhere near the estuaries, the gray shadows of the north grazed alongside mother-of-pearl water lilies. And at the very top of the hill, among the rocks, the crack still existed. Arin crouched down beside it, just as he had on the first day. A drop rolled out of the crack. It fell into a tiny hollow the size of a palm, which for 12 years he had forbidden anyone to touch, enlarge, or improve. The next drop came a minute later. The spring hadn't changed. 1 drop per minute, just like on the day when his tall neighbor had advised him to dig a grave. The entire ocean had grown not from the volume of this water, but from its properties, and from the resolve of the one who had sat over it back then and refused to give up. Arin touched the puddle at the bottom of the hollow with his finger. The water warmly pressed against his skin, recognizing him. He smiled, stood up, and walked down toward the fires where people, the knots, and his students were waiting for him. Behind him, in the darkness, a drop fell into the hollow, and another, and another. The spring continued its work unhurriedly and eternally, because the true source had never been the water. The true source was the one who had once understood that strength is measured not by depth, but by how much life you are capable of creating from a single drop. The story of the owner of the drying up spring ended there. He began with a puddle that people laughed at. He ended with a world where children laugh by any body of water without fearing it. Between these 2 points lay all his battles, all his losses, all 9 unique beasts of war, and one rule passed down to the world forever. The final point was not made with a sword or a claw. The final point was made with a drop.